Good morning. How are you? Lovely.
They're just a neighborhood homeowner association.
Test the mic.
Some, it has to be some sort of homeowner, you have to get the homeowner. Well, the majority of it. You have to get the- Yeah, it can, because it's enforceable by law. So basically, the only way, if you want it out of the statute, you just rewrite the homeowner. Just like you would do in the Constitution, everything, you say, hey, we got a new policy, strategic plan.
See, now we got the developers are coming in, and I don't think that they want to keep that in there. They maybe want to put some other stuff in there. There's another thing coming up.
Where the developers can control that, the
But
homeowner.
right now, they're trying to bring like these 10 lots, one of the lots that's in the neighborhood.
Okay,
They're trying to reach across the street, pretty much. So,
You don't rent shepherds, so.
yeah.
Yeah, every time I pass that subdivision, I think of
Well, I'm not even, and actually, I'm not in a subdivision.
Okay.
It's like,
Okay,
so those two streets are not the same.
okay,
They're the only subdivision that owns them.
okay, okay. Wow. Well, for the home ownership, people in the neighborhood, just like in Riverside Terrace, City Council passed an ordinance. And I can't tell you I totally agree with this, but they passed an ordinance from Charleston, Fernwood, all the way over to down, those lots of doors, like 1,000 square feet. You cannot subdivide those lots. And it's just that little section. All other Riverside Terrace, you will do what you do. Yeah, you, it was a neighborhood and you were.
That's what we have to fight for.
And what I would do is go to the city council, be at large, be in the district, and that's where I would bring that up. To preserve that. I'll be right back. More than likely, they will be there. But I think what you know your public hearing, bring it up. Riverside Terrace did the same thing, where the lots cannot be subdivided. So, and of course, the white boy that was on the city council, he lives in that section. So, you know, that kind of pushes him along the way. But I think that's the sort of thing that you bring up in the public hearing. We want the same thing they did in Riverside Terrace, where they preserved the large lots, where you could not subdivide. Good morning. Okay. Riverside Terrace. And actually, this area, Riverside Terrace is to the west. Some of this is Washington, so, but Riverside Terrace is the big section, it's 21 section. Riverside Terrace restrictions. Riverside Terrace. See, I just told you a lot of them are going down. And that was one of the problems, was that everybody have to redo the house or build
registration materials. However, please come get food and refreshments, coffee, juice, pastries, and have a seat. The program is not started tonight. This was a mingle for you all to get to know each other and everybody can get any time anyway. Okay? So just please come have some refreshments and breakfast. Okay?
It's the hair.
Good morning. Good morning.
There's coffee. Mason Williams. Nice to meet you too.
Good morning. How are you? So I'm sorry I did not introduce
That's
myself.
okay. What's your
Alicia Jackson.
Alicia Jackson? Okay, Mason Williams. I'm with Iberia Bank.
Oh, okay. Okay. I haven't been in this building at all.
I have, this is my first time in the company. My first time in the building, so.
Yeah, I've not been in since they built it, so. Maybe 5 years.
5 years. This is what's in all that. Beautiful building.
And I actually, let me take that back. I have been here. I've been here for some kind of form. So it's actually older than that. So don't have me trying to date myself. It's not gonna work. So I came here when they first opened it. They were having some kind of show. And it was just so
And so you know you need to get your PowerPoint up.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go ahead and get.
I'm on pretty much.
Let me know if
Campus where they used to have.
Oh, no.
you should. Let me know if you need any assistance with this.
Oh, yeah, I have no idea how to
Okay.
work Blue Jeans.
I will. She said it's already up. She's just gonna pop on at 9. You know, she's got
Okay.
another hour. She's got plenty of time.
Okay.
And it's already up.
Because I
But you need to know how to put your PowerPoint up, right?
Yes, ma'am.
What I missed. Go get in.
Okay. Hello, good morning.
Hi, how are you? Good. Hey, nice to meet you. Jay Iyer.
So nice to meet you, sir. Nice to meet you. You know, with my glasses and there's hair on my head. Look. Things are going well. Things are going well. You know, I've never stopped moving. You know, I know you never stop moving. You are very busy and you have a huge area to cover.
He said just minimize it. And it's like any other company from that point on.
I was actually gonna email it to myself. Oh, okay. So how have things been, Scarlett? Oh,
So at some point, they have to replace that position.
yeah, I was like, I didn't say anything. You know, I didn't say anything. You know, we abided by that hiring freeze. It didn't work out well for us. It didn't work out at all. We have since started internal hiring.
Chivalry.
But the caveat is, if you need your current spot. I said, well, nobody going in.
Yeah, because they might have to replace that position unless they get somebody internal.
Well, that means nobody's gonna go anywhere. Who the manager is gonna say, oh yeah, he can go ahead and go, or she can go. I'm used to it. Like, very quickly. I said, they were like, oh no, Jack, crazy. I was like, he ain't crazy. very quickly. Very,
There's a lot more to it, right?
there was a whole lot more to it.
How are you? I'm good.
Yes, I saw that. Wonderful. You okay?
Yes, sir. I am. I'm just pulling my PowerPoint. I sent it to myself last night, just in case, because I can't plug the computer up into.
Sure. Oh, sure. Of course I am. Okay, now I don't know. Right, she comes on. Excellent.
So just bring this back up and show you up there.
Good. It was good. That's right. I saw it on housing. I figured it's all back. It's a great. On NPR and he liked it very much. So it's a wonderful. So she sort of wonderful detail how much it went through the class. Yes. I'm glad you it's a fun house. I'm almost here all the time. Like the rest of Brandon Ronnie. Or you have all those. Thank you so much. Hey, no problem.
Once we get to her, she's part of that person. I won't need to. I mean, this is a whole slide. So it says who they are. I don't.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
be able to hear us talking.
Next week? Okay. That's one of the, because I'm not the leader. City Council.
Text it and say that you're ready. Then I'll make sure I can look Blue Jays.
least at some level. And what counts? Yeah, it was great. It was great. It was great going on with that. The format of it. So it's good. Yeah, it's pretty extensive, right? You said John's not. Oh, John's gonna do it. He's gonna do it instead of John. Okay. I would love to. Yeah, so I just talked to her. Oh, great. She's great. I'm trying to get to the camera. So I'm like,
I know I've announced this before, please complete those forms. We're doing a pre and post. If you haven't, we're collective, they're only valid, good for us to collect before the event starts, before the event. So if you haven't completed, we're collective. Sorry, you know, to repeat for some of you, we're gonna do it periodically when more people come in until we start.
Testing mic. Testing mic.
Okay, yeah, I think I heard, okay, yeah. All right, Freddie. Ernst, yeah.
Look at mine. I think that's Dr. Rodriguez with also.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome all. I am Dr. Anthony Michael Rodriguez. I'm here with the Barbara Jordan McAleenan School of Public Affairs. I'm standing for our Dean, Dr. Michael Adams. He's hoping to be here. There's so many conflicting events he has right now, but he should be here before the event is over. I'd like to share with you a couple housekeeping matters. We have this day, the event will be streamed live. It will be over our channel, BJML-SPA. But you can find it, you can share with your persons in your social media connections, hashtag Call Housing. If you go to hashtag Call Housing, you should find the live stream for this event, and you can share it out to others. And the recording will be posted up soon after the event is over. Before I proceed, also, just know we have the facilities, male and females, right behind in the hallway. And if you do bring food in the auditorium, please remember to take it back out with you. I'll be most appreciative. Keeping on our agenda, let me welcome to and introduce and bring up to the podium Judson Robinson III. And on that, my work here is done. Thank you.
Good morning. And I want to thank Mr. Rodriguez for introducing me this morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I really appreciate everybody coming out on this bright sunny morning to be a part of this, what we hope to be a series of discussions about the importance of home ownership and making sure that it's fair and equitable opportunities for all people. You know, the all people discussion is something that is fading in American society today, and we're going to have to be a lot more aggressive as we talk about the value and the importance of all people participating fairly with equal access to opportunities so that we can continue to have the kind of country that we know it to be. Amen? Amen. Okay. I want to thank all of our partners that are here today, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, the Houston branch, and Texas Southern University. It's a beautiful auditorium. Here at the Barbara Jordan McAleenan School of Public Affairs. The Urban League, as you know, is an organization that really focuses on equality and access to equality. And we know that the fundamental platform of that consists of education. We know that people have to be educated. They have to find adequate employment. So jobs is a big part of the work that we do. Workforce training is the way that we get people acclimated to what the real life job skills look like that will pay a livable wage. And of course, housing and health. I mean, if you're healthy, if you're educated, you got a place to stay and a job, chances are you are on your way. So we thank all of you for supporting the concept of our work that we've done for over 100 years nationally and more than 50 years, almost 50 years here in the city of Houston. So I welcome you to, again, this wonderful discussion today. I thank our partners and our sponsors, and I really look forward to a fantastic discussion today. I encourage you to continue to the Urban League as we move forward in the process of progress. Good morning, and thank you.
Good morning. I'm Vicki McBride. I'm a consultant to the Urban League and the Houston Area Urban Community Development Corporation, and I am happy to have you all here this morning. And you've heard my spiel a bit, but I'm going to give you a little bit more detail. And this is the point that we must finish all of the registration forms. I've seen some others come in. If you have not done so, please complete your registration form at this period, and we're going to wait about a few minutes before we move into the panels. The purpose is we're measuring the knowledge of our audience today about fair housing, fair lending, and topics surrounding the fair housing issues. We've invited specific audiences this morning. We have bankers, we have the real estate industry, and we have apartment owners and developers. We wanted to make sure that we provided as much information to these groups in the housing industry as possible related to fair housing issues and topics. So, at this time, please complete your forms. We'll collect them now. Anyone else who comes in must complete them outside, so they're going to be delayed a little bit, but we know others are coming in. But welcome and thank you, and hopefully this is something that you gain a lot of benefit from this morning.
I'm not going to say anything.
Forms. I see a few of them, so we'll give you a few minutes. Any forms to be collected?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Dancy. I'm from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, Houston branch. I'm the Community Development Specialist, and I serve about 40 or 50 counties across Southeast Texas. Thank you, Justin, and the Urban League. I'm going to jump right into this discussion and dialogue. What I want to do first is kind of lay a foundation for us to kind of spur conversation and dialogue. And so I want to go through a little bit of data. This will be on a mile-high level, but I need to give this disclaimer. The views expressed are my own and do not necessarily reflect official positions of the Federal Reserve System. So what we're going to do is an overview of fair lending and fair housing. I want to go through a few quick points that some of you all may be familiar with. Of course, the Fair Housing Act and the Equal Credit Opportunity Act protect consumers by prohibiting unfair and discriminatory practices in lending. Fair lending rules apply at every step in the process, from advertising to the actual loan servicing portion of an actual transaction. There are 4 general categories to fair lending: discrimination, disparate impact, disparate treatment, and then predatory lending. Discrimination is self-explanatory. Disparate impact, while the policy may appear neutral on the face, it has a discriminatory impact on given populations. Disparate treatment is actually discriminatory on its face. So these are policies, practices, products, all of the above that are discriminatory to certain populations. Predatory lending is providing products that may appear to be predatory. They do not promote repayment and ultimately trap people in a cycle of debt. Lastly, it also covers unfair and deceptive acts and practices, UDAP, but that's also covered under another law. So when does fair lending apply? It applies during the solicitation and production selection process, underwriting, during the pricing of your products, during the servicing of products by banks, during the monitoring process where they're monitoring repayment and monitoring those products, during collection, foreclosure, and loss mitigation where there may be a refinance opportunity, as well as third-party activities. So when actually financial institutions hire collection agencies, the actions of those third-party entities is also covered. So let's talk about some common fair lending risk. There's a redlining risk, branching practices, and/or assessment area delineations that do not include minority areas. There's a marketing risk, when you target products to certain populations and omit others. There's a pricing risk, where the loan officer may be compensated based upon how the loan is priced, or there's discretion in loan pricing, which means for certain demographics there's one price, and for other demographics there's another. There's a steering risk, where the loan officer is compensated higher or lower based upon the loan that they're actually selling. And there's an underwriting risk, which means that there's a lack of uniform underwriting standards or documentation standards. Some people are underwritten harder than others. So let's really touch on a few fair lending hot topics and common violations. This information actually came from our examinations consumer compliance department, and so these are some of the hot topics that they have been seeing recently. Our hot topics: indirect auto lending, which means that there's some type of financial institution or credit union that's underwriting the activities of an online proprietary lender. Fintech, which is actually online lending, peer-to-peer, lending circles. There are so many different types of, now fintech has expanded to include so many different types of products. You have small business online lending, which also may be covered. Technology and lending, the fact that now most of our lending process has gone online, the sharing of documents, a lot of the things that were also, that used to be written into the loan process, on average, statistics say that it cost about $8,000 to book a mortgage. But now, thanks to technology, that price has been reduced substantially. But there are also a lot of risk that come associated when you're sharing documents of private information for individuals. Another hot topic is loan originator compensation, where loan originators are being compensated at higher rates for loans that may be considered to be more profitable. So some of the common violations that we've been seeing. Regulation C, HMDA data reporting. And so there's been a lot of issues around the income reporting where people are not documenting income properly. And then also a lot of issues with how actually financial institutions are reporting their HMDA data. In many instances, it is not uniform, and a lot of times it's skewed and not correct. There have also been Regulation B, which are Equal Credit Opportunity Act violations. Adverse notice requirements have not been followed, and it's been a common violation to where financial institutions are not giving the proper notice and are not following those requirements. Also spousal signatures. When somebody is actually married, there needs to be the signing of the spouse. And in a lot of instances, there have been situations where one spouse has signed, and there's not been any justification of joint intent. So now I'm going to jump to fair housing. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in housing because of race or color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability. Common fair housing related issues: redlining, steering, appraisal discrimination, disparities in property value appreciation, gentrification, and natural disasters, which means the disaster recovery process is not equitable. Other barriers to overcoming fair housing challenges: declining minority home ownership rates, buying while black or brown, and a housing market that penalizes integration. One of the things that I wanted to touch on this slide is actually explaining that, imagine that you were buying a house in an up-and-coming neighborhood, and you pour $25,000 worth of repairs into your new home, only to be told that after the time and the effort, that your home's market value is basically the same as or even less than what you paid to acquire and restore it. Imagine that this crucial decision about the value of your home was made in a matter of hours by a suburban property appraiser who visited your home for the very first time, took one look around, and wrote questionable character of residence as the reason as to why he knocked down the value of your home. So I want to give you all a few statistics and data. Zillow did a study in 2016 that showed the negative value or negative equity in homes based upon race. This was a national study. So in African American communities nationwide, it showed that on average, 20% of African American communities had all of their homes with had a negative equity spread, compared to a national rate of 10.9%, and then a rate in Anglo communities of 9.9%. So it shows that in African American communities nationally, we're twice as likely to have a negative equity value. How did Houston measure up? In this same study by Zillow, when you look at negative equity by race, you'll see that in African American communities, it's 8.1. In Hispanic communities, it's 6.5, almost 2% lower. And in Anglo communities, it's 6.8. So there's another thing that I wanted to actually highlight. This is actually the market value analysis that the City of Houston just published in March 2017. or April 2017 is when it actually became available for the public. And I wanted to show you all a few charts that actually demonstrate some of this information that we're going to be talking about when it comes to fair housing. This chart actually shows the median sales price. The data that was available was the sales data from 2014 and 2015. So if you'll notice, the darker the shading, the higher the sales price. And you'll notice that they're concentrated mostly to the western side of the city. So I want you to keep this chart in mind as I show you the next few charts. So this is sales price. The darker the shading, the higher the price. This one showcases foreclosure filings. Using the same data, you will notice an inverse relationship. So you notice that where the sales price was lower, you have a higher proportion of foreclosure filings as a percentage of the sales. This next chart shows the percentage of subsidized rentals. So if you'll keep in mind the first chart, which showed the higher prices and sales prices, you notice foreclosure percentages, inverse, and you'll notice subsidized rentals are extremely also inversely related to the sales price. The last chart I wanted to show you all is a sales trend. There's a lot of data that's going out. Pew Charitable Research, or Pew Charitable Trust, the Brookings Institute. There's actually a professor, a tax law professor from Emory, who actually did a recent study that showed for African Americans and people of color, buying homes may not be the best approach to building wealth. Because it's shown in the data that buying in historically African American communities or communities of color, you don't gain as much property value or property appreciation as you would in buying in a community that may be a little less minority. And the data also shows that for some reason we have a market that now penalizes integration. Essentially, common terms, the blacker the neighborhood, the worse the values. Or the blacker a neighborhood gets, the more the values depreciate. So I wanted to show this in relationship to Houston. You will notice that since 2013, the city of Houston has been doing these market value analysis. Using the data that was available on the 2013 study, which was the 2010 and 2011 sales data, you'll notice that the top represents the higher value homes, the bottom represents the lower value homes. You'll notice that in our top categories, A and B, these homes appreciated at a value of almost $200,000 between 2010, 2011 to 2014, 2015. These communities are now selling almost $200,000 more than what they were selling just a shy 3 years ago. But you'll look inversely to our lower end homes in categories H and I, and you'll notice that these homes have had, in some instances, only a mere $3,000 worth of appreciation. So the communities at the bottom, which are lower income, tend to be black and brown, and the communities at the top tend to be Anglo communities or more affluent communities. And you'll notice that this actual appreciation of property value, this concept of it not being equitable, is also true right here in Houston. So I wanted to use that as a primer to give some data and show that Houston is not that different from a lot that we see on the national scene. And I want to bring up our first panelists, our first panel, and we're going to jump right into the dialogue as we begin to talk about some of these issues about how we move forward, but then we also look at the implications around fair housing to kind of level the playing field. So first, Jay Iyer. He's a Texas Southern University assistant professor. Jay, if you'll join me. John is not with us, but he sent a very capable young lady in his stead to handle, Chriselle Pillay. She is the Houston director for the Texas Low Income Housing Information Service. Christy Lambright from Harris County. She is actually in the Harris County Planning and Development Department, and she has a very, very important role that she is actually undertaking, which she will have an opportunity to explain to you all. And then lastly, we have a young lady who is joining us from Washington, D.C., and I'm going to pull her up on Skype. Sarita, you can unmute your computer. I don't want to make a mess. I'm going to let Dr. Rodriguez do this because I think I'm making a mess.
Where is she? She's on.
Yeah, she showed her logged in, but Sarita, unmute your computer.
Yeah, that's a something.
I know. We'll give her an opportunity to unmute. I have her on my BlackBerry as well. Okay, so while she's working on it, wow, the beauty of technology.
She's me. Sorry.
Should text back. So what I'll do first is I want to actually open it up to the panelists and give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, their organization, as well as their connection to fair housing so that you can get a better understanding of who sits in front of you. Jay?
Sure. Thank you so much. My name is Jay Iyer. I'm an assistant professor in the political science department here at Texas Southern University and the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs. My area, my background is I teach primarily both sort of urban policy generally, but politics as well, political science. And so as someone who works in political science and as a lawyer, and I had worked as chief of staff for Mayor Lee Brown when he was in office. My area of really looking at this issue is really what I want to do is put some context as to kind of why we have the FHA and also the fair lending elements and why it's still needed, and how it relates sort of Houston in the dynamic of Houston is I think by all accounts the most diverse city in the United States. We're also one of the more segregated cities in the United States, and how that fits into the dynamic of creating opportunities for housing, and put other issues like gentrification and how that fits into the conversation that we're having here about providing greater access.
Well, good morning. I'm Chriselle Pillay with Texas Low Income Housing Information Service, and I am the Houston co-director here in Houston. And so our organization is a fair housing and civil rights advocacy organization, and traditionally we have led efforts in Austin basically doing a lot of policy advocacy, but my role here in Houston is more so to work directly with community-led organizing efforts, and basically be able to help them to further fair housing, but also just take a closer look at inequality in many communities, and helping community members and leaders to understand exactly what's going on in their communities. Just giving you a little bit more background about myself, I actually have a background in architecture and led a career in architecture for about 10 years before the financial crisis hit. And at that time, I actually took some time to work in Independence Heights, not long after Hurricane Ike hit. And as I commonly say, or usually say, is that's when the blinders slid off my face, and I started to really see what people were dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and how Hurricane Ike really exacerbated people's circumstances. And so, and with working with Texas Low Income Housing Information Service, not only am I able to help community leaders to navigate the bureaucratic process, but we're able to do a lot of research and basically substantiate people's claims and let them know that what they're seeing and what they're experiencing is not a figment of their imagination. It's real. Segregation continues to exist, and our communities are feeling the effects generations later. So it's my role to basically start to put the pieces together and really push forward and put pressure on government, on private industry as well, to really begin to right the wrongs of our history.
Hello, my name is Christy Lambert. I work for Harris County in the Department of Harris County Community Services Department. I have been working for the county now for 16 years in the planning and development section. Our role is to administer several grant funds from the federal government, one of those being from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development HUD, entitlement funds, disaster recovery funds, CBG home ESG funding, and several special grants that have been given us over the last several, I guess, decade. One of the things that is required of us is that we conduct several public meetings, that we do several public documents. One of those, in which I would like to implore all of you, is something that this region is about to undertake. The cities of Pasadena, Missouri City, Galveston, Harris County, the housing authorities of Galveston and Harris County are about to embark on a process called the Assessment of Fair Housing. This is based on the final rule that just came out from HUD, in which we will be doing a massive community engagement and research and creating dialogue, and I'm hoping I'm not being forced, as my colleague here has said. I hope we will embrace each other and come together and really to have a conversation, as was spoken of before, about how to make this community, this region better, how we can, explore more housing options. And I would like to invite all of you to come. We'll be putting out several public meetings, several focus group meetings, stakeholder meetings, interview times. If I could get your business card, I will hound you to come to those type of meetings, because I think it's important for all of these cities to get together with you, with the community, and create a document that will actually be useful. I thank Christina Lewis from HUD for taking us on this journey and being with us on this journey as we go through it. And I'm just very excited to be here today to talk to you about this issue.
I'm going to see if this works. Sarita, can you try to speak really quickly? Oh, technology. We're having a bit of difficulty, but we're going to continue to try to get this correct. So I want to jump right in. Of course, Jay brings a legal perspective to this picture, or this narrative. And Jay, as we look at moving Houston forward, or moving this region forward, you've done a little bit of research on the legal ins and outs when it comes to fair lending and fair housing, more specifically.
Right.
Are there any, I guess, roadblocks that we can anticipate or expect, given the nature of how we've done in the past here locally, and then what's pretty much anticipated moving forward? Just precursory, are there any roadblocks that we should avoid as practitioners moving forward to kind of minimize or mitigate potential legal issues that we may have?
Well, I mean, I think when you outline the issues related to the Fair Housing Act, and even in terms of lending, right? Obviously, there are the structural. The act itself, both acts were created to minimize and prevent discrimination based on race, gender, and et cetera. The issues, I think, in terms of are really as they come to enforcement. What we've seen with a lot of FHA-related incidences or lending incidents is that they're just simply not enforced because as a practical matter, the individual that would be inclined to make the complaint is by definition sort of in an inequitable position on power, right? So the idea of going into a bank and asking for a loan, and that loan be several points higher than it should be, or we don't, or that the loan is unqualifiable because of the condition or the state of the housing stock or the location of the housing stock, that implies there's legal redress because an individual would have to file a lawsuit, right? Or make a complaint under the terms of equal credit. The problem ends up being is that individual is not really in a position to do that. And so you, in theory, you have the structure for litigation, but as a practical matter, it's not done. So more often than not, it's really third-party institutions that act on behalf of private individuals. It's one of the reasons why you tend to see more class actions filed against a particular group of lenders or a particular group of home developers that may be looking at that. That's the issue. That's one side of the litigation. The other part of it is when you look at things like where you place affordable housing. As we all know here in Houston, that was a huge topic as it relates to the location of affordable housing in more affluent areas, and continues to be. There continues to be a fundamental philosophical debate as to how we redevelop communities, right? Because at the end of the day, one of the reasons, because you had thrown up the data point on the appreciation values in certain communities is much greater than others, and does that lend itself to state that there's less of an interest in home ownership? I would say no, or should be less. Home ownership, physically owning a house is still the greatest singular asset that any individual can have. That's just been proven over time. The rate of appreciation may be less, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that should be ignored. So I would disagree with any conclusion that says you shouldn't buy a house. So that's one thing. But what makes Houston sort of unique is that we are a vibrant, sort of dynamic city in a literal sense, because we're sort of tearing things down and rebuilding things all the time. So really the bigger issue for us is what's the shape of that development, right? Because what you're likely to see more of, and we're seeing it literally around this university, Third and Fourth Ward doesn't really exist anymore, right? It's just half of it's Midtown now, a little bit of Montrose, a lot of things. Third Ward probably won't in 10, 15 years at the current rate of development. So I would argue that part of the bigger issue to me on the housing side is really the affordable housing space, right? The average cost of home is increased dramatically, and that to me is really the conversation that needs to be had. I wish there was more redress for litigation, to get to your base question. I'm skeptical that we'll ever see that without a more streamlined administrative process. So.
Okay. And so, Chriselle, that kind of brings us directly to you all. An organization that's known for pursuing litigation on behalf of individuals. So I would definitely say, to kind of follow up on what Jay just spoke about, as an organization that has the resources to pursue litigation on behalf of individuals who may have been wronged or may have experienced a fair housing issue or complication. What do you see as a not-for-profit carrier, as a voice for these actual individuals? What do you see as I guess the best approach that we as practitioners in this space should take in moving forward to try to prevent these situations from happening, like the affirmative furthering fair housing lawsuit and things like that?
So, that's pretty loaded. So, and I want to echo, basically what Jay said. One of the, main issues that we see is definitely lack of enforcement and being able to bring litigation forward. And so, one of the things I know that we're actually working on right now is we have teamed with right here in Houston, Lone Star Legal Aid on an effort due to the Bank of America foreclosure settlement. We were able to, we're working collectively where lawyers are going to actually be working directly with us along with UT Law Clinic to pursue fair housing issues and to specifically identify some community development issues and environmental issues as well. And being able to work directly with impacted community members so that they can either, they can file cases collectively or individually, but being able to bring a toolbox that has not really existed prior, where these attorneys will be working directly with impacted community members. So one of the things that I would implore, I guess, the real estate professionals to do is to seek out some of the community organizations in the communities in which you work or focus and see what some of the issues or concerns are there. But then also, if you hear or know of a particular concerns, I would say to start having some dialogue as well, because another thing that I'm also realizing more and more is that as a real estate professional, of course you're trying to best serve your client, but oftentimes there are different practices and that you may not really realize that you may be leading folks down a certain path. And then also, in many cases, those impacted individuals don't even realize that they're facing discriminatory practices either. So it has to be some ongoing dialogue, definitely, between all parties so that we can hopefully get to a place where we start to tamp down these ongoing instances of discrimination.
Can I just say one thing to that? One of the problems we have locally or in this state is that in other states, the governmental entities, the local government entities are involved in the litigation process, right? So in Texas, in theory, we have a Texas Attorney General's office that has a consumer protection division. And so normally what would happen is you would have that office or that division that would be empowered to file lawsuits, much like, for example, the city attorney's office here does deed restriction enforcement. Unfortunately, we don't really have consumer protection in Texas anymore at a state level, right, with the AG. So I would say part of the issue is, I think with the work that your organization and others are doing is fantastic, but it's kind of a failure in our state governmental leadership structure, and the fact that cities and counties are really not empowered to be able to help.
Okay. And so that actually brings up, I guess, one of the things.
Oh, no, we skipped me.
Well, no, I'm actually.
I just felt like there was a gauntlet.
No, I was actually coming to you.
That wasn't really.
Well, no, actually, I was actually coming to you because in a lot of places, as Jay mentioned, they have a more active and robust local presence when it comes to enforcing fair housing. But in Texas, absent something strong on the state level, we have a lot of municipalities that have taken an interest in this subject matter. And so that actually brings me to Christy. So, and Christy, you bring the perspective from Harris County.
Which is an even less powerful entity in the state. If the state is all that is God and under all that, municipalities, cities are the next, and down below are our counties. We have only the powers the state prescribes us directly. So what do we do with that? Well, we create mechanisms with our funds, in this case HUD funds, FTA funds, things like that, to create empowerment around fair housing. We've created a concentration so that developers who are seeking a resolution from us for tax credits for our funds have to come to us and say, we want to put this here, but there's 8 other low-income housings right next to it. We're like, well, let's spread that out a little bit. So we try to create mechanisms that make sense, that help the community not to have a stacking of poverty right on top of each other. Because I think that's something that developers like to do, because they're looking for cheap land. They're looking for what makes sense on the bottom line. One other thing is we have a down payment and closing cost assistance program within the county. The county actually has ownership of that. We have created mechanisms that prevent or help to prevent predatory lending. That we help offer an instant equity into your home, that help with credit, that help with home buyer education, so that you know how to maintain your home, so that perhaps the value of that home doesn't decrease because of deferred maintenance and that kind of thing. One of the things also that we have through our home program is that we assist with the financing of low-income housing. Low-income housing, particularly multi-family units, has been a great challenge. We constantly are bombarded by neighborhoods who do not want affordable housing in their area. I have gone to meetings where I've had to have the sheriff's department escort me out to protect me in my car, because people are impassioned about their community and impassioned about how their community expands. And I have found, working with the Housing Authority of Harris County, that it actually works better if you go in and talk to them first. That we have a communication that everyone can live here and everyone can benefit from each other. So I have found that perhaps litigation is, and we have through the state of Texas have that put upon us, is sometimes a little bit aggressive or makes government a little fearful. I have found that working together and working with the housing advocates has actually benefited us. To having that conversation up front with the neighborhoods, with the housing advocates, with the developers, with the housing authority, and all other stakeholders has been the thing that has worked the best. We have a housing complex that we're building right now. It's called Westlock. It is near Tomball. It is a high opportunity area as defined by HUD and the state. And the neighborhood there was just up in arms. They thought that we were bringing all of this criminal element. Well, it's a senior center. It's a senior facility. It's for those who are 65 and older. There weren't, those dastardly old people are going to come and do what? And so by coming out there and saying, hey, hold on, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about this before you come to us and start protesting, and then their other side, our housing advocates, come to us and start pushing us. Let's all have a conversation and let's push this down a little bit, because I think, we work on a more of a close to the ground level. We're on the macro level. These dear people, they work much higher up with public policy, with state policy and research. I have to work with people who are actually sitting there and this is my house, or I need a house. And I think that dialogue there is, I think, has helped more our community than any, no offense, litigation of a state or local government. One of the things that I'm going to put out there is we're actually seeing a decrease in affordable housing, both for single family and single family and multifamily. Our housing, we're having a hard time. Our down payment and closing costs over the last 5 years has seen a 16% decrease in affordable units out there. It's going to get worse and worse, I think, as we go along. It's hard for government, because government only has so much power and so much money to put houses down. I think we really need to start, getting with our developers and start creating mechanisms for them to do so. And unfortunately, I think the state has created has a position right now that they're going to not let cities and governments to incentivize housing in developments that are already going down. And I'm actually rather fearful of such legislation. I think that's the wrong way to go.
Okay, so actually, Christy brought up a good point, NIMBYism. and it's something that not only nationally, but here locally we struggle with. And so I want to pose to all of you, is it simply doing more engagement, or is it something more of shifting the dialogue about increasing greater understanding about what actually affordable housing is and who it's for? Because most people don't understand that affordable housing is not for a vagrant or for a criminal, but it's for those working class individuals that oftentimes serve us at hospitals and serve us as paramedics and serve us as entry-level teachers and those individuals. So is it more of a shifting the dialogue and reframing the context so that people understand, maybe, I hate to use this word, workforce housing. Some local municipalities have now moved to that terminology and away from affordable housing. Do you all think that it's more of a reframing the context, or is it more engagement, as you said, Christy?
I'll start. That is something that we are doing right now, finding that if, while not a four-letter word, affordable seems to be something that is retracting to many communities. So I think we have been seeking, I went to it was a very good presentation by the Kinder Institute where we actually had that conversation. So what do we call it now? Is it workforce housing? Well, that's not really, it seems like a shell game at that point. We're kind of like pushing off this word of affordable for workforce. Well, what happens when workforce becomes the not so good word? I mean, I think it needs to be a shifting of understanding, not just because it's the word affordable, but because this is what our community needs. A community needs, a vast array of incomes and a vast array of culture and a vast array of people doing different things. It makes a stronger, more diverse neighborhood. Just like your economy can't just be one industry. Hello, oil in the 80s. You cannot stand just with one type of person in your community. It makes you flat. It creates a perfect circle which is never going to survive. So I think that is what we need to do, not redefine things and reterm things that are exactly the same. I think it needs to be more in here, more of a shift of values than a shift of wording.
So, from an advocacy perspective, I see this in two different angles. From an advocacy perspective, I see it that we have to address, if we don't address the history of how we've gotten here, then we'll continue to play this game over and over and over again. So we need to, for once, be real and understand that the reason we're here is because of practices that were put in place during the Jim Crow era that have led us to where we are now. That's why we're here. So that's number one. But understanding, coming from the corporate world, I understand the importance of nuance. And some things do have to be nuanced sometimes in order to get the can down the road. But one thing that I do want to say is that there are efforts that are ongoing. I know specifically in the city of Houston when it comes to trying to be more assertive and more aggressive with having affordable housing dispersed throughout the community, specifically with the housing department's YIMBY initiative, Yes in My Backyard, as opposed to saying no. And so they are taking on this campaign now where they actually have firefighters, with the Houston Fire Department and some folks that are working like the 911 dispatch, having, a real campaign trying to invite people saying, can I be your neighbor? But in addition to that, though, we have to go beyond just the PSAs. We have to have some real sit-down conversations. I had the great experience of actually testifying at speaking at the Fountain View public hearing meeting. Was it 2 years ago now? 2 years ago now. And I've spoken at several public comment meetings. Never have I spoken at one like this, where I was faced with approximately 500 angry folks who did not want this housing in their community. And when I stood up to stand, being probably one person of color in that room, they looked really confused as to why I was even standing there. And then when I started to actually talk in support of the property, I was booed, hissed, and I had to be escorted to my car. I'm sure much like your experience as well. But what I realized right then and there is that the folks that scream the loudest are rarely ever confronted face to face. They just scream the loudest. So it's time for us to start confronting those loud voices and having that conversation. It's not going to be comfortable, but I think that's what has to be done. And then also I want to also point to, there has to be real political will. Because if we don't have political will that says yes, we must rebuild our communities, yes, we must do that. But we also must provide choice for those who want that choice. There has to be political will in place that's going to really support that, push that forward so that everyone can take the lead.
So from a purely economic perspective, diversity in terms of housing stock and socioeconomic diversity in terms of socioeconomic integration is almost impossible to achieve in a pure market system because the incentives work against you. The idea of having a $500,000 house right next to a $100,000 house is almost impossible to occur, right? So when we talk about NIMBYism, what we're really talking about from the perspective of a homeowner, or which I'm sure a lot of us in here are, is do I want to see, because of the appraisal system that we have in place, I am losing home value in having this project next to me. And so that's effectively what you're confronting, right? On the flip side, and we need to be honest and talk about the flip side. If you have a developer that wants to come into the Third Ward or Acres Homes or Sunnyside and wants to put up $200,000 units, right? Just above what would be considered market rate, that person would need a police escort to get out of that neighborhood as well. So we shouldn't be completely isolated in here, but we need to recognize that there's real complexity in creating socioeconomic integration within neighborhoods. We see this not just in housing, we see it in schools, we see it in life, right? So the policy structures have to change. So part of it is going to be things like the appraisal system, because the fundamental appraisal system, I think, creates real difficulty, right? On one end, it essentially, if you have an excessive amount of high-income housing stock in one neighborhood, it increases everyone's value up to the point where the lower-income stock becomes unaffordable to be held. The flip side is true. When you have large numbers of lower income housing stock, the higher income stock collapses in value. So there's sort of this balance and sweet spot here. So it's really, really hard to do. And so sometimes I think we want to get upset with with communities that say, no, we don't want this in. I think it's less about, I think it's much more about their concern about the value of their home declining than anything else. All that to be said is there's absolutely, the simple fact is, the FHA, the loan program that came out in the 30s, created suburbanization, basically desegregated it. It was because it was only allowed for Anglo populations, so it essentially hollowed out the cities that way. And so we're dealing with that now. But all that being said, it's just going to be, it's a difficult task to do, and there's larger policy issues in place, and we're always going to have this problem.
So I would encourage the audience to prepare your questions. I'm about to open this up. But I want to give you all one more question, because I know that there are probably going to be some people in the audience that are going to have some tough questions. Looking at realtors, developers, community-based organizations, so many of the people that are in the audience, bankers that are in the audience, in the ideal environment, how would we need to possibly structure us working together to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to home ownership, to an affordable housing circumstance or housing situation? If we're to move forward, I know that we're all aware of some of the things that are coming out of the city locally, whether we're looking at complete communities or we're looking at all these different initiatives that are potentially on the table. What do you see as one meaningful step that we all can take in the right direction to trying to begin to ensure that we look at the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule and all these other things that are in place now to try to make a meaningful step forward? I'll start with you, Chriselle, because I know that community-based organization. I'll start with you, and then I'll get the government, and then both legal perspective.
Okay. So I'm going to say intentional community engagement. I think oftentimes what happens is, there's kind of these one-off meetings, but there's not a continuation of these encounters. And so I think that we have to really be focused on intentional community engagement and getting a real true understanding of all sides of the spectrum. What are the real needs, or what are we know? Well, some of us tend to think that we know what the end goals when it comes to the real estate industry. But to have a conversation with realtors and some community members, or to sit down and, in most cases, when I talk to my community members, if they're talking about, going to the bank for a loan, they haven't begun a dialogue yet with the banking industry at all. They just have maybe gone on the website and taken a look at what programs are offered. But, we have to really get back to a place where we are, having engagement and having intentional relationships with one another to better understand, to start having some of those, like I mentioned earlier, some of those uncomfortable conversations, because we have to be able to move past the discomfort to get to the solutions.
You stole mine. That's all right. I would add second to that, just right underneath that is education. Knowing what fair housing is, knowing what the law is. We've been having meetings with several of our landlords and their staff. And one of the things that we found that the most was management staff of those landlords, and we also have ones for real estate and lenders, was that they thought they understood fair housing. They had that, well, yeah, there's protective classes and there's this, but they didn't understand reasonable accommodation. They didn't understand reasonable modification. They didn't understand how the simple things that they do, because they thought they were doing right by the resident, was actually against fair housing. By having that education, by having the involvement, and then pulling it right behind it, the education and understanding it, not only teaching management, also teaching frontline staff, also teaching your board of directors, your others, what fully is fair housing and how it affects not just one class of protected classes, but it affects the entire community, and how it can make everything stronger, a better lender, a better landlord, I think is very important.
Oh, God. I think just as much as, from a policy perspective, as much as can be done as it relates to creating economic incentives for development, both of Class A, Class B apartments and affordable housing. I don't use the word affordable because we've all just apparently agreed that it's a pejorative these days. So housing that, or let's just say mixed income housing. As much as you can do as far as economic incentives, I think is critical, right? I mean, we use wraparound agreements for Walmarts and Targets and Whole Foods these days. We need to do similar sort of thing, methods for real estate development. I think that's a big part of it. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is we don't have enough housing stock. We don't have enough housing stock in the price range. We don't have enough Class B apartments in that range. And Houston is an expanding city, continuing to grow. And unless there's incentives to do it, you're going to have a problem. And some of it may correct itself because you may have market pressures driving prices down. but I think you need to try to shape the market in a more productive way. And I would argue for appraisal reform. I think that's a big part of it. Property taxes are too high in general, but that's a whole nother issue we can talk about, because property taxes affect poor people much more than they affect rich people. But for some unknown reason, poor people don't care enough about it, about arguing against the raises in property taxes. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go ahead and open it. Now, I know we did not touch a elephant that may be in the room or not. Gentrification.
Yeah, oh yeah, I'm sorry.
And I would be remiss if we did not, touch it, because it's a serious topic, and it's something that Houston sits at a turning point when it comes to gentrification in a lot of neighborhoods. And really just the
We're
area
literally
in general.
sitting in one, actually.
Well, it's apparent, but as you mentioned, Fourth Ward, and the dwarfing of a lot of those smaller bungalows and shotgun houses by massive commercial, multifamily, upper income, because it's not middle income, upper income units that cost about $2,000 for 1 bedroom. And so it is a reframing of that dialogue, but how do you see not combating gentrification? Because for some people, they believe that it's necessary to a certain extent to uplift and rebuild and revitalize the community. Is there a balance with it, or is there something else that we should look at in trying to deal seriously with gentrification, not only 3rd Ward, 4th Ward, most of our inner city neighborhoods?
I mean, I would say yes. I think it goes back to really what I said, is that there has to be a plan in place that allows for continuing economic development of existing neighborhoods, but maintains, as part of that process, a guarantee that you're going to maintain mixed income housing stock. Because the problem ends up being is that the reason is, what makes Houston vibrant to some extent is that we have very lax development rules, and that allows for aggressive development. The downside is the lack of rule structure means people are incentivized to create $350,000 townhomes everywhere, as opposed to 150 to 400, right? And having a percentage mix the way you might have that. So to me, that's really the ultimate answer, because it's hard to tell people not to. You can develop, but you can only develop certain kinds of stock. But what you ought to do is you ought to say you can develop all kinds of stock, and here's how we're going to do it, and we're going to help you do it and incentivize it.
So what I would say, so yes, definitely. One of the things that we work with our community, some of our community leaders is, we've identified what we call 4 rights. And one of the rights is the right to stay, meaning that if you live in a community that is gentrifying or that is on the brink of gentrification, you should have the right to stay in that community without being displaced because of market pressures. So that means that, with that, we are also talking on an ongoing basis with some of these community leaders about what are some potential policies that we could really push forward to make sure that they are able to stay in their place, in their particular place, be it an apartment, rental situation, or if they're homeowners. What are some policies that we can really support and propose that ensures that property taxes, don't rise too far or has a certain, cap, or there are different ways of addressing property taxes, because to Jay's point, that's one of the ways that many of our longtime residents in these communities are being pushed out of their homes because they can no longer afford the property taxes. Then also making sure that there's some sense of like a preservation of affordability when it comes to rental units, because that's another thing we're seeing is that, to your point, these rental prices in some of these communities are just going beyond, out the roof. And so we have to really push policies that ensure that people that are from these communities can continue to stay, and understanding and knowing that the market is going to do what it does, but we have to be very proactive to protect those residents that are living in these communities.
I agree. I think you've hit upon everything that I would state. I think that having a way to preserve and allowing people to stay in their neighborhood as that neighborhood improves. Nice. And with that, thank you. I think having mechanisms, incentives, protection programs that allow people to stay in their homes if they want to stay in their homes is very important. I sometimes think the state government is working against us to be able to do that, but hopefully with, as we still go for more advocacy, not just from government and maybe from government, but also from you, from lenders, from industry is also important. I think, leaving the homeowner alone to create their own action, to create their own change is great, but actually partnering that with industry, partnering that with government layers it so nicely that no one can say no to, that can ignore. So.
Okay, so
No music?
Sarita, try to say something really quickly. It went away.
Oh, sorry.
Technical difficulty. We'll go ahead and open it to the floor. If there's a question from someone.
Please,
We have
please use the microphone.
Okay, I'll be quick. This question can be answered by anybody on the panel. My name's Kay Chambers. I'm a banker, but I'm a Houstonian. I grew up in one of those neighborhoods that is being gentrified. And what I wanted to know, if there is an example, maybe in our state or in this whole country, where that mixed income model is working, and what are they doing, and how can we do that?
I think you're looking, I guess that falls to me. Atlanta has started to do some of that, and it's working there. But it's exactly what I said. It requires a lot of incentives from the city to have that. Part of the issue is a desire, well, there's a couple things. One is things outside of incentives like, it's economic incentives to build housing stock, but it's a little bit with kind of what the mayor is trying to do with this concept of complete communities, is that all of the other resources in a neighborhood are preserved or try to improve upon. So educational facilities, parks, libraries, et cetera, all sort of almost like a master planned approach. But they're doing it. I think Baltimore is trying to do it, but it's been less successful. It's just really, really hard. Houston is probably in a better position to do it than most because we have a lot of empty space relative to others, and our land values are relatively low. So it can be done. It's just never been a priority hopefully up until now.
There are a lot of cities that have taken mixed income.
Yeah.
Atlanta, New Orleans. After falling Hurricane Katrina, there was a lot of controversy about how they did it.
Right.
But they did undertake a mixed income model, and that was promulgated by HUD originally in their redevelopment through Enterprise Community Partners, and they really did take that approach. Baltimore has also taken the mixed income approach. So it's something that progressively has happened. In San Francisco, of course, they have the mixed income, but they also have rental caps. And in a lot of those places, inclusionary zoning has played a major role in that process. We don't have zoning at all.
Yeah, so that's hard to...
Zoning is going to be more difficult.
Yeah.
So but I mean, it can also be an inclusionary variance. We can get crafty when it comes to politics. So, there are different ways to combat it, but there are other parameters in place.
Yes. My name is John Heil. I'm with the Department of Veterans Affairs. I work in the Houston VA Regional Office. And I wanted to talk to you about property tax reform. Because you mentioned that most of my life I've lived in Tennessee, Georgia, and Florida. And moving here to Texas, I bought a house, and I didn't really pay attention much to the property tax rate, the millage rate. And when I realized it, it was an eye opener. I think taxes are real high. So, is there any programs that I guess with the counties for property tax reform in those more affluent areas, those higher priced housing areas?
Unfortunately not.
I think there needs to be more advocacy for that because, as you mentioned, Dr. Iyer, that's a big issue when it comes to home ownership.
Yeah, I mean, we have I think the 5th highest rate in the country in property tax. We don't have an income tax, but people on fixed income, property taxes are a much bigger percentage of their overall expenditure than anything else. And so it disproportionately deals with or hurts older homeowners. It hurts and homeowners that are lower income. So it's a real problem. But again, I said this, and I'm not trying to get overly politicized in it, but for whatever reason, it's not been something that I think property tax rates is something that progressives have not spoken about very much, and that I think they should.
Good morning. My name is Catherine Jones Hunter, and I'm a mortgage banker. And my question is there an opportunity in regards to political will to see if HUD would be willing to increase the area family median income guidelines for our city? 80%, it would support more, not only of workforce development and affordable housing. The median area sales price, as well as an 80% AFMI does not match. We would serve a greater good and way more people, as well as getting them placed in all areas throughout our city, if we could offer the assistance that truly would be affordable to them to support the housing that they're looking for.
We agree. I would love for us to go to 120 median income, which they do for some disasters. We've gone up to that for home ownership. It's something that gets played around with, that it's a statute, so it's actually, something that your Congress member is needed for. So I would say yes.
Just to echo the sentiment, so prior to working at the Fed, I worked for a member of Congress, and he's on financial services. And so we dealt with trying to increase that actual calculation for the median income. That was dead on the route.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Because there's an expectation that at a certain point, people are not classified as in need.
Yeah.
But it's not reflective of the different demographics, really, of the markets that exist potentially on a less than MSA level. But what exists, like we have to deal with the pressures here in Houston. So what may work just outside of Houston doesn't necessarily work for us. But changing those guidelines and that formula has been impossible, even when showing there is a need to change the formula. It's just politically not palatable, especially not now. That was before now.
Right.
Now we struggle to hold on to CBD at all. And at all.
I was going to say the same thing. It's just not politically real, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Hello. My name is Nedra Cheatham, and I'm with the Center for Hope. I'm also a new resident here in Texas, and I have ran across obstacles as far as property taxes and assistance with trying to make down payments on a new home. Now, my husband and I, we make pretty good money, but it seems like it has to be a certain criteria amount for us to put down on a home. And so we're trying to figure out what type of programs are available here in Houston for us to be able to purchase a home, because they're making it like we have to make at least between the two of us at least $100,000. Well, guess what? We're about at 75, so why would that actually eliminate us from not being able to purchase a home?
That's y'all.
Houston Area Urban League is one of the sponsors of this event. We would love to work with you through housing counseling to get you qualified to work with some of these lenders here in this room. Okay. So we'll take your information.
Okay, my name is Shad Bogg, and I'm just a realtor. But
Not just.
I just wanted to make a few comments, and I'm glad you guys are having this. The first comment, the difference between income, the appreciation of those home values from west to south has to do with schools and crime, and it's the perception about crime more than anything else. The Galleria has one of the highest crime rates, but the perception is that it's not. So when you look from a realtor standpoint, the appreciation is always going to be driven by schools, and it's going to be driven by crime. And those are the things that are going to determine those different values. The second thing is that politically, and I like Shazette, political will. The biggest issue in this city is when you're ever trying to do an affordable housing project, whether they're apartments or homes, you've got to be able to get neighborhood involvement. You've got to get a letter from your congressman, your state representative, and most of the time they're not allowing those letters to be given because they have to go back to these gerrymandered districts, and the people are voting against them when they allow these projects to go on. So until we can change this if we do not, if the state legislature does not take these letters from neighborhoods. There's no project in this city, there's no project in the country that when you build affordable housing, that it causes your home values to go down. I'll give you an example. River Oaks and 4th Ward, right down the street from each other, did not change the property values there. And so, and the last thing I'd like to say, to me, over the years of me practicing real estate in this city over 30 years, the biggest issue, the biggest blow to affordable housing that gave NIMBYs control was the Fountain View project at Westheimer. That was, and nobody really talks about it. Low Income Housing talks about it, their group, but nobody talks about that project. That project was a model project to show people that people of workforce, low income, live in a good neighborhood, go to schools, work at these jobs, and have an opportunity to live right. Every project you go, if you put people in a position to win, the kids come back out, they get out of poverty, so on and so on. And I'm very disappointed that no one talks enough about this project in the minority community, in the advocacy community, except for very few. That project was a blow to affordable housing, workforce housing in this city.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said. I mean, I think the one thing on that particular project, and it sort of brought on a larger sort of an existential question about how you see economic development and housing development occurring in communities, because for years it had always been, the conversation has been driven around the idea of areas of opportunity, which obviously that area is. And the flip side argument is that the money that's spent on there should be invested in historical communities. Look, I think at the end of the day, it's a question of whether we think socioeconomic integration is a good in itself. I would argue it is, and you clearly do as well. I think it's right. The problem ends up being is that how do you balance that with what some people perceive as a lack of historical investment in minority communities? And that's, I think, what the mayor was dealing with, and to some extent, I think, bowing to a relatively vociferous community.
So, Shad, yes, I totally agree with you. But to your point, I think you're right that Fountain View was, in a sense, the straw that broke the camel's back. And because of that, that one particular project that never was brought to City Council agenda, HUD actually had issued a Title VI finding. 13 pages. Right, exactly. Basically stating that although that this was the last action, there's been an ongoing legacy of, fair housing violations. And that was the one project that, in a sense, broke the camel's back. And so now the city is in a place now where they have to address those issues. Yes, it's a 13-page finding, and I know the city has since responded. But you're absolutely right, and the more we talk about it, and maybe we will begin to build that political will, but the longer that is kind of hushed down, then it kind of just stays under the radar. But I would implore you to check out, I know here lately, the Christian Science Monitor talked about it, and we have some other things. We are continuing to talk about this issue because it's a huge issue. I mean, and actually, people are talking about it nationally, and I found it very interesting when I travel about. People actually ask me about Fountain View, but here in Houston, you don't really find people that really know much about it.
So, with that project and others like it, there have actually been numerous that most people don't know anything about because it never rose, and it happens in the county. Tax credits. Tax credits are a major financer of multi-family housing for affordable housing. In the rules for the QAP, which governs how those applications go in, they give enormous amount of power to neighborhoods, to state representatives, not senators, but state representatives, to give a letter of support, and jurisdictions, the city and the county, to write resolutions. Just for the resolutions, it's 14 points. If it's an ETJ, it's 7 points for the city, 7 points for the county. The letters I think are equal to them, and if at any point any one of those collapses and they don't get a letter, it kills the deal like that. I mean, that deal never even makes it out of pre-application. It's dead on arrival. It's not going to make the funding line. In a lot of cases, the developer actually retracts their application and doesn't even go forward. They take back their earnest money, and we never even know about it as far as the community goes, because it never made it to be talked about by the community. I know you have a question.
Well, one question. I sat on the board of Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs for 7 years, and I will tell you the QAP is written by the legislature.
Yes, it is.
TDHCA just follows the rules that the legislators put in force there. And so, and this thing about a tax credit being very expensive, they're all expensive. They're all expensive. They're not a cheap project to do. The Urban League CDC is doing a project right now on Alleman Post Oak. It's $175,000 per unit. And the reason is because of the land costs, the tax credit costs. Now you have the issue of the current administration and HUD, and the president is wanting to cut corporate taxes to 15%. There's no incentive for the Exxons and Mobils to want to do tax credits, or the GE, or any of these. So then affordable housing, or whatever you want to call it, it will take another blow because nobody's going to be wanting to do tax credits. You can't do bond deals anymore because the interest rates are so low. It's a huge issue, and I just wish that we would really tackle this issue. Stop looking for single family. Maybe we need to start looking at condos that are affordable. Maybe we take a unit and do a fourplex or a duplex. So you got land costs at $125, you put 4 units on there, you take the maintenance fee, put it in the monthly payment, so you're always going to have it maintained. You hire a man. We're going to have to stop thinking everything's about single family if you want affordable.
Testing. Gloria Sanderson. I'm a CRA and Fair Lending officer at a bank. Gosh, I don't know which one to tackle. The longer I sat here, the more I wanted to talk about it. I was so disappointed about Fountain View. And I wondered about the lack of conversation, but for myself personally, I had missed what was going on if it wasn't for the fact that something made me keep taking that Sunday and Wednesday paper, because I just couldn't let go. And I sat down and read my kitchen table and read that article, one really full, several-page article. There wasn't a paper about it, but I was a little disappointed in my mayor on that. One of the things I wanted to see how long the conversation would go before the word socioeconomic was actually used, because one of the things I'm seeing is, as opposed to, and from a fair lending officer perspective, is less of a racial bias, but there is becoming a bias, a socioeconomic bias. People are against low-income people, no matter what color they are. And how does that change the way we attack the problem?
So I know I'm not on the panel, but interestingly enough, what we do at the Fed is a lot of research. And it was brought to my attention, not by a person who had experienced, I guess, housing discrimination, but by a community-based organization, some of the things that were occurring in Galveston post Hurricane Ike. So if many people are not familiar, Galveston demolished a majority of their public housing units after Hurricane Ike. And to date still have not rebuilt those public housing units on the 10-year anniversary. And so it prompted me to doing some digging and doing some research. But now, well, I'll just go ahead, I can say this but not write it. So this paper is actually being hammered by our editors because the Fed normally has not written about things like this, gentrification, issues like this. But what's interesting is that 10 years later, most of those units still have not been rebuilt. And the sentiment in Galveston, even in the midst of all the public scrutiny that's occurred, city council, people have run on city council campaigns, no public housing, no low income, no anything. There's an anti-sentiment against the low income. And now that sentiment has spread not only to those individuals, but to community-based organizations. And now community-based organizations cannot even get permits to operate on the island. So most of the community-based organizations have now moved to the mainland because the city council has blocked their operational permits, their acquisition permits. This is the kind of sentiment that is now occurring. I can say more than what I can write, but that's indicative of what's occurring. So it's not something, it started with housing, and it was public governmental, I guess you want to say, the housing authority units is what it started with. But now, landlords are now being incentivized to put their units on Airbnb and not put it on rental, long-term rental. So, you know, the city is now offering an incentive and a tax incentive for you as a property owner to let your term be a short-term rental instead of being a long-term rental to provide somebody an opportunity to have affordable housing on the island. So, you know, it's a sentiment that is now, you know, it's spread. So I guess what it started with, and as you're saying, it's now socioeconomic. You can come to the island and work, but you can't stay here. So, but that's the concept that has occurred in Hilton Head, South Carolina, Myrtle Beach. So many of these other places have that same similar concept, and now it's arrived right down the street.
Yeah, I mean, SES status is not a protected class. And so, I mean, it's not designed that way, right? And so as a consequence, it's sort of structurally designed to allow for discrimination against poor people. So I'm not sure how you do it without altering the law, and I can't imagine that's going to be changed anytime soon.
And I just want to add, poor people that happen to be black and brown.
Right, down here.
Yeah.
Down here, and I mean, we can be, I mean, we can, in Texas at least, it tends to be, SES and race are somewhat intertwined. That's not necessarily, in fact, that's not true nationally, but it just is here. And so, as a consequence, the ramifications in like Galveston is that it essentially a lot of black and brown people are not allowed to live on the island anymore.
That actual situation is a little bit more interesting. So I'll give an instance of, there is a battered women's shelter in Galveston that prior to the hurricane, majority of their customers or clientele were black and brown. Now their customers are Anglo and Asian. And so they're populations that they never saw before, that they're now seeing, and they're experiencing the same thing. So it does go beyond race. What started off as a situation that it impacted only black and brown now impacts Anglos and Asians, and typically they like they said, they've never seen. They didn't even know that there was that large of an Asian population there, but now this actual entity operates in Brazoria County, and they're forced with busing individuals from Galveston Island to Brazoria County to service them and then bus them back. Another question?
Any other questions?
We're good. Oh, wow. Oh, there's one.
Yes, my name is Freddie Noble with State Farm Insurance. I want to go back on the tax issue. One thing we have to think about is that your property tax is the only way that the government is going to make money, is through taxes. And so if we ever want to change that, we have to make sure we're getting the right people out there to process tax, but also get the right people into the office to vote to lower the taxes. That's the only way the government ever is going to make money. So we're going to always have our property tax going up because our government, unfortunately, is wanting more money from us. And there's special interests that's controlling those issues to make them have more money. So that's where it kind of leads back all into it about how we're going to make sure we have the right people in place to make sure that everybody's included. If we don't have that then we're going to continue to have everybody get priced out beside a few.
Yeah. I mean, there's a difference in the way commercial and residential property taxes are adjudicated. We all understand that. Residential property owners disproportionately bear higher percentages of property taxes now because of the way the system is developed over time. Ultimately, I think the answer probably would be the most politically easy thing to do is essentially raise the homestead exemption pretty dramatically. Exempting maybe the first $150,000 of property would make the property tax system a whole lot more progressive.
Recording is on.
Oh, there it is. Sorry? We got it.
Oh, great.
But she has to go. Yes, she's going to join the next panel. She's going to join the next panel. Yeah. Okay. Sarita's going to join us on the next panel.
Okay.
And that's good because she would have a real good handle on best practices nationally working for the organization that she works with. But Shad had a question as well. And then Vicki.
Question on, just a comment on property taxes. The key to property taxes, and the realtors are looking at this, and we're fighting up there in Austin for it every year. But I'll share something with you. The key to property taxes is fairness, okay? And I'll give you a couple examples. I won't call the people's names, but I'll just give you a couple of examples, public record. Somebody in town that live in River Oaks, their home is valued at $10 million. 2016, it was valued at $10 million. 2017, it's valued at $10 million. Somebody that lives in Cashmere Garden, their property taxes have gone up 30%. If somebody that lives in South Park, their taxes have gone up 50%. Somebody that lives in Westbury, their taxes have gone up in 15%. But if you lived in Bel Air, your taxes actually went down. You tell me how that is fair. You know, I went to my state rep, Representative Hubert Vo. Went to Hubert. I said, Hubert, let's sit down and look at this. The median price of homes in your neighborhood has gone up 20%, but the tax appraisal has gone up 40-some% in your district. So what the Caras County, the districts are doing are padding the taxes, and that's the issue. So why is the house in River Oaks 10 million, but the people in Cashmere Garden have gone up 30 and 40 and 15 and 20%. It's about fairness, guys. It's you know, if everybody's paying their fair share, we won't have this tax issue. Everybody's not paying their fair share, and that is really the key. And the realtors are fighting it. We've raised homestead exemption again. Houston, Texas is real big with veterans. If you're a disabled vet, you don't pay any taxes. You know, we've done some things, taxes, but everybody's got to pay their fair share. If you go to my commercial friends, they'll start telling you, oh, you got the furniture, you got all this stuff that determines whether the value is worth, but the building is on the tax rolls for $100 million, but it's worth $300 million. You can't tell me that's much furniture in that building. So my thought process is that it's all about fairness. We've got to get a fair taxing situation, and it has to be common. If you live in Fort Bend, it's a different way they do it than they do it in Waller, Brazoria, Harris County. We've got to get a uniform way to doing it. And it goes back to the people you elect in office that goes up to Austin. They can fix it, but we've got to do it from that end.
Testing. I have a question back to your slides when you were talking about the movement of home ownership for minority populations, and that they're losing, and it may not be a great idea, but you realize that is wealth stripping also. So if wealth is being diminished because home ownership is where most minority groups have parked their values over the years, what is going to be the solution for dealing with that situation about wealth?
I am not in any way saying do not buy a house. That is not what I'm saying. But so there has been a lot of research and data that's gone into it to say that the wealth building strategy of buying a home and owning a home just doesn't work as well for people of color as it does for Anglos. And so that whole thing goes to say that the market has structured itself in a way to not benefit us in the same manner. So it does take us looking at more innovative strategies about how we look at our building wealth strategies. And so that's the whole demographic. It still is always going to be a safe investment to buy a home. You know, you may not get the payoff, but I think that argument goes to, are you looking for a short-term payoff or a long-term payoff? And so ultimately, a long-term investment, you should get a return on your investment. Now, if it's a short-term strategy, you may not benefit and gain $100,000 in 1 or 2 years. But
And I'm not sure I agree with that. I think, yeah, I mean, just in the sense that I think there's a statistical anomaly that you're looking at. So part of the issue is the rate of increase in value in lower income homes is statistically lower than it is in higher income homes. So part of the argument ends up being is that because of the way socioeconomic status tends to be, we tend to be segregated by that. Poor stays poor, rich gets richer. So I think part of the argument is the best way to do it is mixed use. That sort of rises everyone. So that's what I would say.
So ordinarily, Jay, I would agree with you, but given I'll give a prime example, and some of the realtors will be very, very familiar with this. You look at the situation that occurred on Highway 6 in Missouri City.
Okay.
You got an area named Fresno.
Okay.
That for some reason or another, it went majority African American, and they suffered much worse than neighborhoods that were in the, I guess you would say, further west on Highway 6. They used the same grocery stores. Sienna Plantation did not take a hit nearly as hard as Fresno took a hit, but Sienna Plantation was nearly not as minority as the Fresno area, and it's sandwiched between Shadow Creek and Sienna Plantation, which are two neighborhoods, same houses, Meritage builders, I mean, a lot of the same builders, but for some reason or another, you could not get non-minority individuals to buy a house in Till Run. And so, and those houses suffered miserably on the value. Even right now, as the values are returning, and they've just now topped over $200,000 in those neighborhoods, I've got several people that bought houses and are just now selling those houses that they could not sell unless they sold it for a rock bottom price. And so you have a situation where you had a person that bought a house brand new, $250,000, and the house next door sells for $119,000. You know, so these are some of the same issues that we do face. The appreciation in a community of color is not the same, and maybe there's a larger discussion that has to occur about why we don't want to live next to each other. You know, and so ultimately, you know, those are conversations that have to occur. They're tough conversations, but it's the truth. And so in those communities, that's not an old community. That's a new community where it's the same thing.
Same thing happened in Hunters Glen years ago in Missouri City. Exactly.
So this is a issue that we have to deal with. Mr. Petrie, and the young lady in the back.
All right, we have one more question, and then we'll stop and take a break and set up for the next
one. Well, my question or my comment was sort of a follow-up to what Shad Bogany was just referring to. Even with the changes in the homestead exemption, we're not using it. Every demographic, I've researched it recently, every demographic, there's about 20% of homeowners who are qualified for a homestead exemption have not filed.
Yeah, that's
that represents a minimum of $500 to, I've done something where it shows $3,000 in certain areas based on the price of the home. I actually am having a meeting this afternoon with the city controller's office around that exact issue. So the homestead exemption piece is very important to minority homeowners, okay? And I really appreciate what you said, Jay, as far as how that would have a significant savings to the older generation if the exemption was higher, because that's indeed one of the issues on why some might not do the reverse mortgage, which would be another way for them to be able to stay in their community. The combination of a reverse mortgage and a higher exemption on that home so that there was no property tax that they had to pay, only had to cover their insurance each year, another way for them to be able to stay in that gentrifying neighborhood. But I really do appreciate all the comments that you've said here today. You helped me understand something. Earlier on, one of the panelists mentioned something, and all of a sudden it dawned on me that we don't like not being around people like ourselves. I'm from the East Coast, and so I look back at New York and New Jersey, and I look back at the definition of a ghetto. A ghetto is where all people look the same in one particular area. We all want to stay in our ghetto. So it's been difficult for us to do that socioeconomic integration over the time period. But that's the new challenge, is that it's not so much that I don't like a white person or a Hispanic person or an Asian person. I just am more comfortable because when we came to America, we were all grouped. We had no choice. And so we've still done that same grouping over time. And that's a danger for us if we don't figure out how we're all part of this wonderful world and be able to find a way to live together no matter what our economic situation is. And I think that's what will help develop character in us and our communities and everything. Thank you.
So I want to speak to what you mentioned regarding property taxes and exemptions and people not taking advantage. And so one of the things that another thing we've been working on is I meet with community members on a weekly basis right now where we're talking about property taxes. And the thing what we're realizing is that there are many folks in communities of color that don't even realize that there are exemptions and deferments to take. And so we are actually talking with some of the leaders that are going door to door, knocking. They've actually done the research and identified folks who would qualify but have not taken those and start to have those conversations. Secondly, another thing that we've started to realize is that there are some folks that realize that they're behind their property taxes and they're taking property tax loans from these predatory lenders. And so they have arrangements set up with these lenders and thinking that that their property taxes are being caught up, but when you go look it up on the tax rolls, they're not. They've not been paid. And so now they are paying these high interest rates trying to catch up on their taxes from prior, knowing that taxes are coming up again. And if they do not, if they default on that loan, then that property tax property tax lender can actually take their home from them or have a tax foreclosure. So these are some of the other underlying issues that we're realizing when working on this. But yes, you're definitely correct in that, and we are really trying to pull back, shed some light on that and be able to inform community people about what their choices are. Another thing we've also realized is that in many of these families, people assume that the deferment or that the exemption is on the property, but it's actually on the person. And so another thing we're realizing is that once the person passes on, the family comes in and says, oh, no, we were tax exempt. No. That person was tax exempt. The property is not. And so that's another way that we're seeing property being lost in our communities.
Can I add something to that? I would like to know, just the program that we're talking about, the city of
the Houston Area Urban League is running a pilot program for the city of Houston called the Post-Home Ownership Program. We're helping homeowners who've received homes, replacement homes or rehabs from the city of Houston know about those issues. It's been enlightening what they don't know and how we're helping them, because many of them are heirs. Many of them have never filed. But now that we are helping them get that those documents filed and helping them with some other areas of home ownership through the first 2 or 3 years of a new home being placed on land that they didn't have any debt on before, and they have a new home. The taxes are astronomical and some other issues that they're going to have to be able to ride out. So we'd like to see more of those types of programs and community-based organizations being able to help in that realm. Thank you.
So, all right, Ms. Petrie, one additional comment now.
Right now, I'm doing exactly that, a homestead exemption education campaign. That's what my meeting this afternoon at the City Controller's Office is about. The numbers are totally ridiculous. I did a quick analysis of Sienna Plantation. And in Sienna Plantation, in 6 of their subdivisions, there are over 2,000 homeowners that are qualified for homestead exemption that have not filed. Wow. Right? And their average is $1,800 a month, $1,800 a year in savings that they could benefit from. So that issue alone is significant. The point that you just mentioned, Ms. McBride, was another thing that I pointed out. People are not aware of when they purchase that new construction home, the first year it may have only had land value that's being taxed. And when it gets caught up to them, that's when all of a sudden there is that $300 increase in your monthly payment because the mortgage company paid your taxes the prior year. Now you've got to pay them that back as well as what it should have been done. So, there are a lot of good and great realtors that are talking about that, but we need to do more about educating the consumer on the project that they're doing.
With that, we're going to pause and take a very quick 5-minute break, and we're going to roll into the second panel, which is best practices.
Because you got, don't leave, because I need you. Take your last one.
Thank you so much.
So we're just out in we went out for RP for the AMH consultant. We're hiring a consultant. We're right, all the jurisdictions, luckily picked the same one. But we'll have a stakeholder, or not, what do we call the core group, the partners. I was wondering if you would maybe be, you or one of your competitors. Yeah, okay.
Sure.
It's the leadership committee that leads where we're going to do, what we'll do, where the meetings will be, that kind of thing. And I understand if you need to do like yourself and maybe another, like, I'm sure you're very busy, can't come to a lot of stuff, and we'll try to do a lot of things by phone also. So.
Okay, how close you guys to selecting the consultant?
I'm going to contract, Huzzy has already gone to contract, I'm going to contract on the 9th, or the 23rd, or the first court date in June, depending on where the contracts get out of legal. Everybody else is about the same. So we should start our contracts on June 1st, thereabouts. So no, we're very, very close, because we got to get going, because we're due January 4th.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
It's going to be a quick. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Let me see.
I think she wanted a photo of all of us.
Okay.
All right.
I know, but I've been involved with it. Larry Moody actually, yes sir, actually is the gentleman. If I can get your card? Okay. Do you have your card? Darn you! Email me. Thank you so much.
Oh, yes, I do. Let me look. I need to look at my
do you want to email me? You can just email me.
Sure. You said if I have any. Hi, Joe.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, yes, 'cause that's who's been leading a lot of our property. I mean, like, she is on. Yes. Okay.
Let me see if I've got one on me. I don't think I probably have one up in my office, but I'll do you,
Okay. Yeah. Give me a shower.
Sure.
Okay. Oh, the card, yes. I have.
That's all right.
Here you go.
Good. Yes.
So what I will okay. Checking on my students. Okay.
Do they come?
Okay. Okay.
There's one of my alumni hustlers.
She definitely told me.
Oh yeah, definitely. Give me a call or shoot me an email. Hey,
Jose.
Yeah.
Please do. Okay. Good deal. Thank you. Okay. Just say that. No, but I see him walking out the door.
Cypress Coalition, that area is, they're organized, they have their own lights.
Thanks for the opportunity last minute because John was supposed to be here.
They're afraid. It's fear that those people, and I know what those people are going to affect my value. Their kids are going to be in my school. My good little Johnny. And Johnny ain't that good.
Are we done? Oh, no, we're coming to you. Oh, okay. Just trying to think okay.
Misconception about who the folks are, which is because to find people already in love.
This is my friend. My friend,
we're talking about.
Yes, like I went to the city of Katy and they were talking about, we want to wipe out our low-income area and we don't want any affordable housing. I said, this is why I didn't come back to Katy. I grew up in Katy. I went to May Creek High School. All the May Creeks, I went to them. I said, this is why I couldn't, because I could not find a house.
Sure. And then you guys can.
Okay.
Sure. Bye. All right. Cool.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
I know. And I saw a
Might have given out to me, see, but I
probably about a month
secondary.
or so ago, and I kept meaning to follow back up with you, and I saw your face, was like, I never get back with Shad.
Well, we'd love for you to come.
Okay.
Give us an update on what's happening with low-income housing. There's so much you can talk about.
Are you involved with our?
I can.
Stop saying Fountain View and Galveston, those bad words. How you doing?
Good, how are you? Good seeing you as well.
Like, I'll say the cheap word. Oh, there's the F word.
There it is. Probably hear more.
What'd you say?
Probably hear more. We talk about it. That's our case study.
I did. Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I can't comment on my boss. We have used took our fair housing plan that we did 5 years ago. Y'all were a part of that. We came and interviewed y'all. Y'all did some great stuff. So I will make sure I have your email, so I'll make sure that y'all are involved. Thank y'all. Sorry. We've been just like busy.
Hey, appreciate your comments. Oh, okay. We issued our letter. We issued our findings. Say that again.
Yes, I heard.
It went well. We're very well received.
I have to pretend like I'm not passionate about this, right? I have to pretend like I'm not. I have to pretend like I'm not impartial. Right. The mayor. I know, their platform. You're very organized with their website.
When I was at PACAS, there was no studies, low income people mentioned. But if you put too many of them right here, it does.
It's a bank's fault. Yeah.
Anyway, I know you can't say much.
How's it going, Benny? Yeah? What are you doing? What are you up to?
Replacing nonprofits that
With the city? Oh, okay. Okay, you know you're all lost retired, right? God, I just spoke to her maybe like 2 weeks ago. So she's still busy, of course. She's out of here. It's a little different.
keep me up to date.
Yeah? Are you, oh, so you're, yeah, I figured you'd be in touch with at least a couple, 1 or 2 people over there. So, yeah, especially with CDBG and home on the chopping block. Yeah, but I mean, they had already had someone in the CDBG. And then, you know, everyone was afraid of a RIF, but now, we figured, okay, they can't go RIF, they can't afford to do it. So what goes programs, fortunately, so. We'll see what happens. Yeah, it's good to see you though.
Taking notes from this last discussion.
I know, right? I was too, just to remember to,
Yeah, that's why I was kind of scooted back. It's pretty good.
Sarita, can you hear me? Sarita, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Sarita? She can't hear me. Can you hear us, Sarita?
Hi.
Can you hear us? Okay.
Yes.
All right, we're
Hear
good.
me?
I can hear you.
Hey.
Hey, Miss Oakland, where's she?
She's in Washington right now.
Hey, she's in Washington. All right. There
All
she is. Hello.
Hi.
Tell everyone hello.
I'm here.
Great. Good to see you. All right, we're about to get started on the second panel. Kevin's going to take it forward. We have our remote speaker to join us. Can you introduce and let her say something about herself?
Absolutely. So we're going to jump right into panel 2, which we're going to focus on some best practices. What's interesting about this is our first panelist, Sarita Turner. She is joining us via Blue Jeans, which is like Skype, but she was applicable for both panels, bringing a very interesting national perspective with her organization, Policy Link. But I want Ms. Turner to have an opportunity to introduce herself, and I'll come to Mr. Johnson, and then Ms. Lewis. Ms. Turner?
Great, thank you. I'm so glad we got the technical issues resolved. Technology can be our best friend and our worst nightmare. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to be in this important discussion. I'll just quickly introduce Policy Link. We're a national nonprofit based in Oakland, California, and we promise to punish the Spurs for you. Promise. Yeah, and we do a wide range of work across a variety of areas: transportation, housing, land use planning, access to healthy food, education. In the center of all of that work is access to opportunity for people of color and low-income communities. So all of our work focuses on equity. And so we work at the federal level. We have a federal policy agenda. That's why I'm here in Washington, D.C. right now. And we also work with local communities and really had the amazing, wonderful opportunity to work with the Houston-Galveston region on the pilot of the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule. We worked with HGAC to implement a fair housing and equity assessment. And I also have a really special place in my heart for Houston because my daughter lives there. So I get down there as often as I can. So I'll just stop there to see what more you guys want me to, how you want me to weigh in.
All right. Mr. Johnson?
Good morning. First of all, I want to thank the Urban League and the other sponsors. This is a very, 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 very interesting discussion. Just a little bit about our company. We're a real estate development company that was organized in 1974. We started initially as residential. We just sold residential houses. Then we got involved with development. Now we're a company that does all three. We do residential, commercial, and also both commercial and residential development. We represent a lot of nonprofit organizations as well as for-profit organizations along the lines in terms of finding properties, doing master plans to let them know what should work best on those properties, building those properties, and managing those properties. So we have a very full spectrum as it relates to developing real estate.
Ms. Lewis?
Good morning.
Good morning.
So happy to be here. This has been a great discussion. First of all, I'm so happy that Sarita finally made it, and I didn't realize I knew Sarita. Can you see me? Can she see us?
She can't see you all, but she can see them.
Oh, okay.
She can see you now.
All right, Sarita, I met you in California a few months ago when you were working on AFH and training some of the entitlement grantees out there. So
oh, yeah.
I never would have known if technology didn't come through. I am the director for the Houston Fair Housing Office, and I am also now over the San Antonio Fair Housing staff. So I am originally from New York, so I'm just learning about San Antonio jurisdiction. I know very little about that area, but I've been in Houston for about 17 years now, so I've acclimated to the heat. And I really appreciate the diversity of the city.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
That was it.
Although I am from New York, I'm not from New York City. So I grew up in Albany, which is not very diverse. And just a little bit about my background. When we moved into the neighborhood that my mom still lives in, we were the only black family in that neighborhood. She still is the only black person in that neighborhood. And our neighbor next door started a petition to try to get us to move out of the neighborhood. So fair housing and equal opportunity is something that's very near and dear to my heart. We, just so you know what we do in the Houston office, we are responsible for enforcement, and we're also responsible for compliance. I was telling Chriselle when I was hearing words like Fountain View and Galveston, it was like stab here and there to my heart. But we are impartial. So I love this kind of discussion, and like Christy Lambert, I don't know if she's still here, and Sarita will tell you, this is the kind of discussion we need as entitlements and PHA start to do their assessments. These topics are heavy topics, they're real topics, and they're real conversations, like Chriselle said, that are sometimes uncomfortable, that we need to have not just with you who are in the room, but those who we are talking about who aren't in the room. So just a reminder to attend some of these meetings when you see the notices on the citizen participation as those go out. So that's it for my intro.
Okay. So what's interesting about this panel, it didn't plan this way, but we actually have rule maker, technical assistance, implementer, which is really, really unique. And I think this should actually add a little bit of flavor to the panel. And so what I want to first open up with, I'll start with you, Christina, because a lot of what occurs around fair housing is normally promulgated by HUD, as far as the rule, affirmatively further fair housing rule, these assessments that you mentioned very quickly, which Harris County has one currently underway, but you have a lot of other local municipalities in this region that may have an assessment underway. The public housing authorities, so many other recipients of HUD funding or federal funding from your organization or your entity. Can you explain to some people that may not be familiar what exactly the assessment is and what's the expectation, I guess?
So some of you, or many of you, might be familiar with what is called the analysis of impediments. And currently, for some grantees who receive money, CDBG funds, community development block grant funds, and home funds from HUD, have historically been responsible for creating an analysis of impediments. After the final rule, we've moved now to the assessment of fair housing. And in a nutshell, what that means is what we want the housing authorities and what we want the grantees, the entitlement communities, so those are the counties and the cities who receive HUD dollars, as well as the states, to now do is to work together to do an assessment of the things that we all are talking about in this room that are contributing factors, that are what we used to call impediments to fair housing, that are problems and issues. And what HUD has now done, and Sarita can of course talk about this from one angle, and then Christy is now working on it, so she really can talk about how the pros and cons of the new way of doing things is we've given you some of the data, and whereas we didn't before, we just kind of threw it at you and said, okay, go figure this out, go do some analysis. And now we've tried to equip you with some of the information. What we don't do for you is the analysis. So we're asking the entities to sit down down and look at the data, bring in your citizens, bring in your partners, your stakeholders, bring in those residents who live in the Fountain View neighborhood, and have those conversations, sometimes that are uncomfortable, about what you need to do, what you can do in order to create complete communities like the mayor wants to do, or whatever you want to call your community, so that we don't have these impediments. And at the end, you have this nice document that HUD gets to look at, and but we ask for it to be quantifiable goals, so that there's hopefully going to be some money behind it. And some of these issues we're talking about, where we have people in the community who don't know anything about homestead exemption, and you know, what am I supposed to, what are you even talking about? I mean, I have a master's degree and I only knew about a third of what y'all are talking about, and I own a home. So when you sit down on those meetings and you go to buy a home and they throw all those papers at you, unless you're doing your own research, you've gone through the process before, or you have someone explaining stuff to you, you don't know a lot of what's going on. And so we're asking the cities and the PHAs to do education and outreach, and so you can enlighten the communities as to what they're missing, so that they make sure that they can get the most out of what is being offered and the funds that are being thrown behind some of these programs. So that's AFH in a nutshell.
Alrighty. And so, Sarita, I'll go to you. As a technical assistance organization that provides this technical assistance for local municipalities and other organizations that are engaged in these assessments, can you talk very briefly about what you've seen, I guess, nationally, when you've helped? I guess I know you've done some in Oakland and you've done some on the East Coast, and you helped here previously with one in the past. Can you talk about some of the best practices that you've seen with these actual assessments, and what can we actually learn from the assessments and the implementation of them?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I want to illustrate is that you have a real opportunity to be on the cutting edge of creating best practice for these processes, because you guys are really early on. The first cohort rolled out late. Their AFHs were due late 2016. And so they were the first, and you guys are kind of in line now. There were a few that were due in April of this year, but you guys are really in line to still be considered some of the first. So you have this opportunity to create a footprint and to set standards for how this process works moving forward. It is really, really just to kind of underscore the points made earlier, and I was having a little bit of a hard time hearing a little earlier, so I hope I don't repeat anything, but forgive me if I do. It's really important to understand that this process, while it's called the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule and Assessment of Fair Housing, it is not just about housing. It is about housing as a proxy for access to opportunity. Where you live determines how your life will turn out in many, many, many ways. And so what would be great, and maybe you did this earlier, is to show some of the data from the data and mapping tool. I would be willing to bet you in some of your racially concentrated areas of poverty, you have some of the lowest school proficiency indexes, some of the lowest labor market participation, some toxic air quality issues, right? All these issues that have continued to perpetuate themselves in Black communities, historically Black communities, because of them being seen as a dumping ground in many ways, and also a lack of investments going into those communities. So a few thoughts around best practice. One of the things that is required for the AFH is that the goals and strategies demonstrate a balanced approach. That means that the goal is to create fair housing choices. So for people who want to move to a higher opportunity neighborhood where there are already good schools and all these kinds of amenities, they have the opportunity to do that. There's a plan to site affordable housing and create pathways into those communities. But for people who want to stay in their own communities, which in my walkabouts about the country, Black and Latino folks and Asian folks are saying, hey, we don't want to move. We want to stay here. We want our communities to be invested in. Then it is really important to ensure that there's a balanced approach about investing in those communities, and that communities that are targets, right, for gentrification have anti-displacement strategies baked in, so that once the community is invested in, if it's right, conveniently, greatly situated, like Third Ward is really close to downtown, there's, where you are now, lots of freeway access, et cetera, that those kinds of communities don't then, the market values don't increase to where the people who have been there historically get pushed out. So ensuring that not only is there good community engagement and the voice is heard, but that the community leaders who represent those communities and the voice of the folks who live there are actually at a table with Harris County, with the PHA, in a leadership role, helping to shape the process from start to finish. What kind of supplemental data do you need to look at that's not provided in the AFFH data and mapping tool that is critical for you guys to come up with the right goals and strategies? How do you ensure that the community input is rich and vibrant, and that it reaches deeply into the voice of the community? How do you ensure that the anti-displacement strategies are baked in to investments in place-based investments, and that there is a balanced approach that creates fair housing choices? So those are just a few of the ways that we've seen around the nation where there's the most success in the right goals and strategies coming out of the AFFH, that the community leadership is at an advisory or steering committee level right from the beginning.
Okay. And so, Mr. Johnson, that brings us to you as a developer and a realtor, and then dealing, I guess, with the implementation of a potential assessment, or really dealing with the effects of one of these assessments. When you're looking at developing, if you're looking strategically at a development that may be classified as affordable, what are some of the factors that you look at as a developer with locating that property there or undertaking that project? Given that, of course, people want to be located, some people want to remain in their community, as Sarita brought up, or other times people want to be located next to employment centers, things like that. So what are some of the, I guess, factors that you look at when you're actually doing the development?
Where there's a need is what we're looking for. We're looking for areas where our research shows that individuals are interested in moving into those areas. Developers are interested in making a profit. Although we represent a lot of nonprofits, the bottom line for developers are finding areas where needs are there and they feel those needs and a profit is made. Some of the things that I think, just listening to this discussion today, that we as minorities need to really look at is recapturing our existing areas. Right now, we're looking at the area south of the South Loop, the MLK area. When I first came to Houston, was known as the South Park area. That is an area just like the Third Ward, although the Third Ward now is more progressive in the sense that we have all types of developments that are taking place here. The Martin Luther King area is still an area we feel of opportunity. Instead of trying to move out of those areas, we think there should be programs to enhance and help develop those areas and bring those properties, and there's a lot of good properties there, vacant land as well as some single-family properties that could be renovated, purchased and renovated. We would like to help people to stay in the areas that they are in. And if you look at most major cities in the United States, across the country, you'll see that the areas that are closest to downtown, the areas that are closer to the medical center, those are areas that we occupy. So instead of instead of trying to figure out how to get to the suburbs, why don't we take time and start looking at putting plans together through our nonprofits, through our churches, through for-profit developers? Why don't we take and look at how do we redo buy these properties, redo them, assist the folk that are already there in bringing those properties up to standard through remodel and loans, and try to make sure that we do our best in terms of making sure that we keep the properties we already own. And so right now, that's where our interest is from a development point of view. Looking at these areas, Trinity Garden, looking at Cashmere Garden, looking at these areas that we already control, and how can we bring new dollars to the table, new programs to the table, new ideas to the table to actually bring those properties up, not let them go, because it's only a matter of a few years. I remember when I first moved to Houston, properties here in 3rd Ward, we could get a lot for $5,000. $5,000. You can't do that now. $50,000. I look at we have a couple of properties now that we're doing an assessment on. The properties alone are going to go for $150,000, $160,000 with nothing done to them. And these are small lots. These are 4,000 square feet lots. They're perfectly located off of Alameda. They're going to be used probably for high-end townhouses. These were properties where we owned a few years ago. And right now we need to do everything, and that's why I really like the discussion in terms of how do we freeze taxes, how do we do things to keep folk in their home, and also from the development, how do we bring new dollars to those areas to bring those values up. And so right now, that's where we are focusing our company, and we also are encouraging some of the nonprofits that we do business with to focus their attention on making sure we lose no more valuable properties that are close to some of the major centers in the city of Houston. One last thing, I said on another panel we were asked to sit on a panel from Houston First, and as you are aware, if you're from Houston, Houston First is the organization that really sort of was the master developer for all of the new development we have in the downtown area. One of the things that they called us in to look at, together with several other developers, was that with all the improvements we've had downtown, and it really, we did a great job for the Super Bowl, and we really brought a lot of businesses online specifically for the Super Bowl, but you have a lot of developments going downtown in terms of townhouses and rentals. Most of those units are going for $1,500 and up. The problem with that, and the reason why Houston First formed this committee, was that they are having the problems with retention of their existing employees. They're having to drive 20, 30 miles into the city because they can't afford to park. They can't look at the housing because at $15 an hour, you can't pay a lease that's $1,500 a month. And so one of the problems that our prosperity of the downtown area, one of the problems that the business owners are finding there is that they're having problems with retainage in terms of the employees because they can't afford to live there, they can't afford to park, and right now they're having to drive 20 and 30 miles just to get to their place of employment. So we have some challenges, but it's challenges that I think that working with nonprofits, working with government officials, working with private businesses, and being active in politics, I think there's the things that we can work towards solving, but we do have some serious problems as it relates to affordability and minorities retaining their properties.
So I'm going to ask a three-part question, but I'm going to tag it to each person. Okay. Mr. Johnson, when it comes to the development that you as a developer, or just developers in general, do, is the key to making this happen subsidy? Is there the need for some type of subsidy from the governmental entity, whether it's local, federal, whatever it may? Is that need there? Then to come off of that question, Sarita, if the answer is subsidy, can you speak to any practices that you've seen from other municipalities where subsidy has played a role and they've been successful in making this happen? And then lastly, to Ms. Lewis, if you're looking at subsidies from the HUD perspective, is it a bonus of sorts? How is it viewed in HUD's perspective, the role that a local municipality or a state may play in subsidizing this type of development to improve the fair housing outcomes in their particular region? So I'll start with Mr. Johnson first.
I think there is a need for subsidies, but we have to realize the current political environment that we are operating in. That is not likely to happen anytime soon. Regardless of what happens with this existing administration, there are folk that are in office that were swept in with this past election that will not support any type of subsidies that are going to help the people we're talking about. So yes, the answer is yes, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Okay. Sarita?
Yeah, so there are some examples from the Bay Area, from Atlanta, and a couple other places that I can forward some information about that have used some creative strategies to help subsidize the cost of housing development around TOD and affordable housing in general, especially in areas that are target areas for gentrification. So one of the things that is important is thinking about a housing trust fund, right? And so bringing private philanthropy to the table. You guys have a lot of philanthropy down there, a lot of it. And it feels like, and I am an outsider, but in my walkabouts during the pilot process for the AFFH and this broader integrated planning approach that we worked with the Houston-Galveston region on, there is a real disconnect between philanthropy engaging to help move policy approaches or to help move approaches that actually cause people to become upwardly economically mobile. There was, in our walkabouts, much more of a focus on meeting urgent and immediate needs, feeding me today, rather than teaching me how to feed myself or giving me the tools to move forward, and then moving a policy agenda that gets at some of the policy issues that are harder to pass in your state. And maybe the surrounding area around Houston. Houston's a lot more progressive. So bringing a broad set of actors to the table, including LISC and Enterprise, those kind of housing development intermediaries, philanthropy, government, and community-based groups to really think about how to create and move forward a housing trust fund. There are strategies where cities are doing the land acquisition that Mr. Johnson talked about earlier, and then selling that land back to community development corporations and nonprofit organizations at a discount to do some of the kind of development that Mr. Johnson mentioned. I think ultimately direct ownership, right, is really important for our community, but to the degree that the city and the county, Harris County, can be supporting those efforts, that is really helpful. And then I know that the city of Houston had been talking about developing a land trust. And so that's another way to create, it is limited equity ownership, but it is ownership in the community. Now, the key to any of these strategies and any other ones, right, you guys have a lot of brilliant folks in the room, and broadly, is ensuring that these strategies get into your assessment of fair housing, because at a minimum, the goals and strategies that go into that assessment of fair housing are supposed to get into the consolidated plan for the county, and then the consolidated plan is what ties the CDBG and home dollars that you can use for some of these things as well. So now those funds have to follow the strategies that are adopted into your assessment of fair housing. But if you guys aren't involved in making sure that those strategies land there, then those dollars can't support these efforts, or they may not support these efforts either.
Okay, and Christina?
So Sarita just ended with what I was going to mention. Creating subsidies for affordable housing is essentially, it's a quantifiable goal, right, that you can put in your assessment. So that's something you definitely want to do, because when she talks about putting it into the consolidated plan, that's where you bring the money in. And that's where we can see that the city or the county or the state is now saying, not only are we going to do this, we're going to put some money behind it. But we know that there's a limit of funds. We know that public dollars at any time could be on the chopping block. And so we like to really encourage private investors, private developers to be able to find ways to invest in the communities. And so I know one of the things they're doing in the city of New York is requiring developers to also do affordable housing. And that's something that I think is working and not working, but it's a model worth taking a look at to see how effective it is there, what the problems are there, and what benefits it's created. And if it's something that we can do here within the city or within the greater Houston area, and how effective that could be, because like someone pointed out earlier, we have a lot of land, but we also have a considerable amount of overbuilding. So we have a lot of multifamily properties that aren't fully occupied. So what does that mean in terms of housing people who maybe weren't originally supposed to be housed there? It wasn't originally built to be affordable housing, but maybe we can turn some of those units into home units. And that's another way to try to subsidize and try to have this model of you have people who are paying market rate and people who can't afford to pay market rate living in the same building. And so they're able to benefit from the amenities in the area, like a fountain view, and they just melt into the background. It's seamless, and no one knows it's there, and no one has a chance to cry, you know, not in my backyard. And so just sort of thinking outside of the box, and not just, you know, how to get some money towards it, but what do we already have? Because as long as I've been in Houston, we have always been building. And so we can look at some of these properties that have been built who are only sitting, you know, half full. Can we house some people there? I mean, these are beautiful structures. These are in lovely neighborhoods, and like I said, some of them have great schools, and it's where you would want to raise a family. So that's the kind of area we want to be able to house people who historically haven't been able to live in those neighborhoods.
So it appears one of the things that you're mentioning is that's the subway. I'm assuming Sarita is at the subway. It's something going on her end. But so one of the things that you mentioned was mixed income. Anyone that's remotely familiar with Houston understands that we have a housing authority that does not promote mixed income development. So in a situation where you find yourself confronted with that type of environment, trying to move to a mixed income model, is it something that you just work around and you try to do it through private development and incentivizing individuals to come in and develop mixed income development, or is there something that you all at HUD have seen that works better with trying to move to an environment where we're actually mixing those socioeconomic statuses and creating an environment where everyone can live together?
Well, I think that historically, I mean, not just Houston Housing Authority, but historically, yes, mixed income is not the housing authority doing housing authorities. But as we've gotten disaster funding, as bad as the disaster was, the blessing was we got a lot of money pumped into this area that you know, we thought of as using to rebuild things that were struck down, but we've essentially been able to create new housing, new models that we didn't think we could, we didn't know we could. So I think that the move has been that, yes, this mixed income model is effective. I think that some of the housing authorities in the area, not just Houston, but also Houston, have realized this is a good thing. It's a way to go. If maybe we can get it built in the areas we want it built, like Fountain View, that it would obviously be a benefit and a plus.
So before I move to Sarita, I want to ask a follow-up question. Some of the, I guess, arguments that would go against mixed income is that how do you finance it, given that if the unit is not a public housing unit, it can't be financed using those HUD dollars. So do you have any recommendation to that? I know that we have bankers in the room, and we have other types of funders that are willing to play a part in the process. So to those who say with a mixed income development, I can't finance it using my HUD dollars because it's not going to be a public housing unit, it's going to be a market rate unit. What would you say to that?
Well, I mean, those of you in the room know we have other ways. I mean, HUD's not the only game in town. So you have tax credits. You also have, I mean, you have home units, which are all obviously HUD, but they're not public housing. You have project-based vouchers that you can use. So, you know, public housing public housing units are just one small way of doing it. And of course, we have housing choice vouchers, which is ideal for families if they can find areas of opportunity where they can use those vouchers. And that's another best practice model that we need to try to identify so that we can figure out how some of those persons who are low income can take those housing choice vouchers and maybe not live in a fixed unit, but can move to an area of high opportunity and find a landlord who will accept that voucher and make that voucher be able to work.
Okay. And so, Sarita, I want to pose to you, and looking at what you've seen nationally, have you seen any innovative strategies where you've seen a mix of funding sources to actually make these types of developments happen, where we can move to more of a mixed income model and maybe not just utilizing 100% housing voucher or 100% public housing units?
So I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing, but I think I got your question, so I'm going to give the answer I think I should give, and you let me know if I missed something. So one of the things I really want to encourage you all to do is to push HUD, even though things look a lot different than they have in the past. I think that me hearing that you have a PHA that is really not open to mixed use development is even inconsistent with the HUD leadership that has been put in place in terms of what they are saying. That really sounds positive about affordable housing development and how HUD dollars should be used. So I think you should push on that. The other thing is that there have been the folks that have been announced as the deputy secretary and the Assistant Secretary of Community Planning and Development at HUD. He comes out of Houston's city department. I can't remember. I was trying to look for his name.
It's Neil Ratcliffe.
We're talking. And then, yes, so you already know. And I did a little asking around down there about him and thought, wow, this sounds like a positive move. So you have a connection there, possibly, and you should use it. And then the undersecretary announcement is somebody that we actually work closely with at Policy Link. So we are feeling a lot more optimistic. What we understand from our conversations with HUD leadership that are carried over from the last administration is that they are still being told to enforce the law and that the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule is the law. And that means concentrating affordable housing and poverty is no longer an acceptable use of HUD resources. So you have every ground to challenge your PHA and push and make sure that that feedback gets into your assessment of fair housing. The other thing I want to point out is that we had a wonderful surprise that we woke up to. Was it this past Monday or the Monday before? Time is moving so fast. Congress actually passed a budget, right? And in that budget, they increased the appropriation for the Choice Housing Program. And Choice is there to ensure that public housing authorities do exactly what you're talking about, right? Create mixed-use housing that is connected to the broader community, and this whole idea of concentrating projects is no longer acceptable. So I would get on top of looking into how Houston, Harris County can take advantage of some of the choice. I don't know if you guys have a choice, had a choice planning grant or implementation grant there before, but this is a great opportunity to pursue that. So the one other thing that I understand HUD is been talking about doing that is applicable here is expanding the use of the Section 3 program. Right, so here again is an opportunity to maybe use some of the connection that you have, hopefully coming into leadership in the Community Planning and Development Department at HUD to understand how they're thinking about expanding it and what opportunities there are, not only to shape opportunities for residents, but also in your procurement strategy, small business owners and contractors, how to really bolster your opportunities there as well.
So I know that we're running tight on time. I want to open it up to questions so that people have an opportunity to ask. I know that Sarita has to jump off in 10 minutes or less, but less than that now. But so if you all have some questions, I'm going to open it up right now because I know we're running short on time.
Questions?
Oh, y'all answered all their questions before they even had them. No.
We have one back there.
Oh, there's one. Okay.
Hi, my name is Zelda Kane with A2Z Real Estate Consultants. One of the things that when I work with the National Association of Realtors, that I noticed that some cities and communities are doing to address affordable housing is the program called the Employer Assisted Housing, where the employers are actually investing in housing for their employees and allowing them to pay affordable rents based on their income. Is that anything that has been discussed or looked into in our areas? Is that something that we in the Houston area would even be willing to address with employees, because we're talking about employee retention? If they're looking at the dollars now that they have to spend on retraining those employees that they're replacing, how about taking those funds now and investing those funds into their employees and into housing to help meet those needs as well?
As a matter of fact, Zelda, this is one of the ideas that we're bringing to the table for the Houston First organization, that in order to solve the problem of affordable housing in the area that they're trying to cure the problem, they're going to have to be involved through this particular program. As you're aware, it has never been really actively used in the state of Texas. There are some great examples in Florida. There are some great examples in some other parts of the country, but nothing here in the state of Texas. So that is one of the ideas that we are bringing to the table. And we think that's the only way for them to solve the problem, because the prices are just not going to meet what their base employees are being paid. So they're going to have to be involved with it, actively with this.
Sarita or Christina, did you all have anything?
I don't. I'm glad to hear that, because when, I can't remember who was talking about the parking, again, I hate to keep talking about the assessment, but when we have these meetings that the entities are going to have, these ideas, these innovative ideas and these best practices, which is what this is all about, are things that a lot of people haven't heard of, they haven't thought of, and they need to be brought to the table, and then funds need to be put behind it if possible, and not just public dollars. I mean, the banks are in the room, so we need to have those conversations and use those CRA dollars if they can, or whatever dollars they want to put, or developers who can do it, or other entities that are nonprofits who can fund some of these programs.
And that has occurred. So what you're talking about is related to workforce development housing. It's occurred in Texas, but not on the public level. So like Eagle Ford Shale, Victoria, there have been a lot of instances where these oil and gas companies have come in, they've subsidized the housing so that it's affordable to their actual, their workforce. And so they have done it, but it's not been on a widespread scale. We even had it happen in the Woodlands. When Exxon went in.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so it went in, Exxon went in, and they subsidized that housing so that those people could work at that Exxon, not only for building and construction, but also people that are going to be housed there full time. So it's more of a policy shift that has to occur either locally or on the state level, where we make a decision that this is something that we want to implement widespread and not just make it deal by deal, each company doing it. Another question?
So can I just chime in on that piece before we move on, because I will have to jump off in a couple of minutes. But I think, the point about ensuring these needs and these ideas get into the document that HUD will receive from your county and Houston is critically important. And it's important not to think of it as just like, oh, there's not enough money to do all that stuff. Get everything in there, because then it's documented, it's in a public document, it's tied to a document that can dictate the use of funds over a 5-year period. So really underscoring the importance of getting these ideas into the document. And during the pilot process, PolicyLink developed an equitable growth profile for the Houston-Galveston region. A part of that profile was looking at what are the future jobs in your region, right? And that was an important part of the profile development to ensure that as workforce strategies are being considered, right, that there is an opportunity to tie workforce development with the actual jobs that will be coming online and the future jobs of your region. So taking that a step further, and I didn't get the woman's name who spoke, but tying that strategy to actual corporations, either that are existing or that the city may be working on attracting to the region, and that is considering giving subsidy to, right? These corporations come in and they get subsidies, so requiring the city to use their leverage power to help subsidize some of the kind of housing that you're talking about, as well as the workforce development approaches to ensure that folks, can retain those jobs, qualify and retain those jobs is important. And I just wanted to underscore that point.
Okay, sir.
Yes, Mr. Dancy, I think you and Ms. Turner were hitting on something. Cities, as well as private industries, and all of the major stakeholders maybe need to look at public-private partnerships, see what the added value would be, job creation, forecasting, land use planning, to show where not only will the people who are developing these projects get a profit, but how it can expand that economic synergy. I think that's what I'm hearing you guys say need to be done. Am I on base with that or off base?
No. So you're on base, and let me be clear. Public-private partnerships occur. They're a big part of what we do at the City of Houston. Okay. They're a big. Now, maybe I don't think that it's publicized as well as it should be, but that's a big part. So there are a lot of developments that are occurring near the Interloop and Sarita at Clevis. So I'm going to close this down. But there are a lot of developments that occur at the City of Houston, whether it's full development. I know some people may be familiar with Buffalo Lakes. I'm not, so that sounds like most people are not familiar with Buffalo Lakes. The area off of Fannin South, 610 Buffalo Speedway, behind the Golden Corral, that whole blank piece of land where now there's some apartment complexes going up, there was a 380 agreement to put the sewage in over there. So that's what I'm saying. So these things are happening, they're just not publicized that well. But there could be an incorporation of some type of affordable housing component there. As of now, there's not. So they're anticipating selling a house for $500,000. So I think it's just really a shift that has to occur, and how we, I don't want to say lobby, but how we advocate for the incorporation of those components. Anyone else have a question for our panel? I know we're approaching that time where we're supposed to stop. If no other questions, we're going to go ahead and turn it back over to Glenda so we can dismiss. Oh, it wasn't Glenda? I'm sorry.
Yes, it's Mr. Robinson. I'm Glenda Kazee, and so I'm here with the Houston Area Urban League. I'm the Housing Service Manager, and we actually, this is our first array in putting together a forum where we can bring partners in the community who are vested to serving that same batch of folks, including ourselves, to open a dialogue on how we can do better and provide more services. So our next steps are going to be, we're going to do this again. We hope to, with the permission of our CEO and President, Mr. Robinson, be able to do more than one, but we'll have that discussion later. So now Mr. Robinson will come up and we will close out our forum.
How about a round of applause for all of our participants, our panelists. I've asked Urban League staff to step in. If you would just raise your hands.
I'm busy trying to catch people.
Okay, so we're still, everything's about filling out something with the Urban League, But certainly want to thank all of our coordinators that helped make this event possible. I see my lovely wife Cora, who was also involved in helping to make today possible. But the little bit of time I was able to sit in, it was interesting to hear just some of these tips, these little things that, when the collective brain trust comes together and you hear all this information, it is amazing some of the opportunities that already exist, but, therefore, for the lack of knowledge, we perish sometime because the answers are right there. And we don't have to go out and create something brand new, but certainly I did hear about things that would create some additional opportunity for us. So congratulations to all of you who helped to make today possible. And with that, unless there's some other...
This is just the last business. Just go ahead and complete that survey. What we're doing is the urban planning program is doing an analysis to see if there's been any change in the information that you received this morning and the value of it from when you came in the door as opposed to when you go out the door. Knowledge is increased because that's what we want to make sure that we have an impact. We want to thank you for taking the time to do this and to be here with us. Thank you.
George, as you're filling that out, I'd like to ask you a question. I had to step out today and spend about an hour of my time on the phone with the New York Times and with the Associated Press and others who are writing about the impacts of Senate Bill 4. I was curious to hear what your thoughts might be about the impact on our immigrant labor as it relates to housing here in Texas.
I think it's going to be negative. One of the things that we've seen in the last, 20 years here particularly in Texas, but particularly in the Houston market, is most construction. If you go by any construction site, you see most of the workers there are from Mexico, Hispanic descent. And that is an entrance. They're doing most of the skilled labor as well as the non-skilled labor at our construction sites. Those wages are built into the construction cost structure. And anything that's that would upset that, anything that would lower the number of individuals available to do those jobs, I think is going to increase our labor costs. So it is a concern.
There was a story in today's Chronicle. I'm just talking as you guys are filling out the form, but the survey. But it talked about the rising cost of housing in Texas, and that some cities, you take in Austin or Dallas, how they're really growing exponentially, and the demand is outpacing the supply. And so as we, think about what we went through with the last bubble in the housing industry, we as I heard the word policy mentioned, we have to really make sure that we are communicating with our state legislators and others so that when you make one law change, it doesn't have a ripple effect all the way down and cascade on other things. So we have to really help them think broadly. And of course, we don't have the paid lobbyists like so many of these organizations do, those who fight for the little people like we do. We have to personally get involved. The Urban League has a certain amount of bandwidth. Michelle has a certain amount of bandwidth, but she's executing the job every day as well as trying to communicate with those who make decisions that impact the people that we serve. So, my dad used to always say, make yourself a committee of one. And I appreciate the folks that are here in this room because I know many of you, and I know that you already do that. But for those of you who think that someone else is doing the work, trust me, I encourage you to get involved and be that committee of one. Thank you all for attending.
All right. Angeline, we'll take them up. Thank you all.
Thank you for inviting me. We had a good time.
Yes.
Are you collecting these? Should we give it to you? And let me know about that.
We'll be calling you because we've got a yes.
Okay. Okay, great.
Here we go.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for the invite. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Here's one of my cards. Can I have one of yours?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I need that. Yeah, we need
If y'all ever need their housing
Card
training,
passes.
we do it for free.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
Great. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, sure.
Sit in a stand or?
Do you want us to sit or stand?
Oh, thank you.
No.
Hello.
He just asked,
How are you
so.
doing? I'm good.
Thanks. Good to see you. It's up to you. Over there? Okay. Hi. Good to meet you. Tell me your name. From Comerica Bank. Awesome.
And they are so involved in the community.